On this edition of Read with Ronald, I read Octavia E. Butler's Kindred and watched the 2022 television adaptation of it. So before we get into this video, I just want to let you know that this book has a lot of themes about the atrocities of slavery and what took place during that time, and it also has assault against a woman and murder. So that's what I want to warn you about before we get into this. And I also want to let you know that I will be going all into the plot of this book. I will be delving into it, discussing it. So if that's not something you want, or if you plan on reading this or plan on even watching the adaptation and you don't want to be spoiled, thank you for watching up to this point right here. But go ahead and feel free to click off. And who knows, maybe when you read the book or watch the adaptation and you want to see if you agree or disagree with what I have to say, then feel free. First published in 1979, Octavia E. Butler's Kindred follows Dana Franklin as she is pulled back and forth between 1976 and 1815 to protect one of her ancestors and ensure he lives long enough to secure their family lineage, while experiencing firsthand what it was like to live in slavery. Butler drew inspiration for the story by reading the first-hand accounts of enslaved people, but chose to present a less violent version of American slavery to entice people to read the story. In an interview with National Public Radio, Butler revealed that Kindred was rejected by 15 publishers due to it being deemed unmarketable. Kindred was adapted into a graphic novel in 2017, which received the 2017 Eisner Award. How did I get Kindred? I want to say about a year and a half ago, one of my friends read Kindred. And they went on social media and they raved about the book. They said everybody needed to read it. It was such a great read. They enjoyed it. And I was like, okay, I'll give it a look, because I had kind of read Octavia E. Butler's other works, The Parable Duology. So I had kind of looked into those books, but I haven't really read them because I always get to like the same part in the book and I just stop reading. I was kind of a little bit familiar with her work and her writing style. So I was like, okay, I could check it out. So when I went to check it out, it cost a little too much. And I was like, I'm not spending all that to get this book. I'm gonna wait to see if I can find it somewhere cheaper. About like towards the end of November, like right after Thanksgiving, I saw this tweet that said, so when are they dropping the Kindred series? And I was like, series? And so come to find out, Kindred was getting a television adaptation and there had been like no information about it ever since its announcement. And I was like, when was this announced? When was we getting a series? So, of course, I wanted to see it because I'm like, well, I've heard the story is really good from my friend. And so I'm like, well, you know what? Let me go ahead and get this book. So I went ahead and I bought the book in preparation to watch the series. And that's how I got this book. So the prologue begins with our protagonist, Dana Franklin. She's in the hospital and she's talking about how she's lost her arm. And there's this guy named Kevin that's with her. Kevin just got released from the police custody because they were questioning him on what happened to Dana, and they believe that he's the one who caused Dana to lose their arm. But Dana has told them repeatedly, no, it's not Kevin's fault. It's not his fault that this happened to me. They both try their best to explain what happened to the police, and Kevin explains that he was in the room and he heard Dana screaming and he ran at her and her arm just seemed like it was crushed in the wall, but he couldn't really explain it. And so the prologue ends with Dana looking at her arm and crying, and then we go into what started it all. So today is February 20th. I'm still reading Kindred. The last time we talked about it was the prologue. After the prologue, the next chapter is the river. And so in the river, Dana says that her awareness of what was happening to her started on June 9th, 1976. Her 26th birthday, and she and Kevin, they celebrated her birthday by moving into a new house. And Kevin is a writer who is struggling with writer's block. So Dana, she's unpacking their boxes and she's putting books on a bookshelf. She's doing fiction because they have this thing about separating fiction from nonfiction. And so she's doing fiction books. And so Kevin comes out to talk to her and like generate ideas for the book. And so she gives him nonfiction books to shelve. And so they're shelving books. And while they're shelving books, Dana, she starts getting dizzy. She gets dizzy and she falls to her knees. And Kevin's like, are you okay? And he runs over to help her. And while he's running over to help her, Dana, she's like, one minute she's in her house, and the next minute she's in the woods. And she sees this kid drowning in the river. So she runs out to help him. It's this redheaded kid. and she pulls him out and she starts doing CPR. And while she's trying to do CPR, the kid's mom starts beating on her and it's like, oh my gosh, you killed my baby, you killed my baby. And Dana's like, stop hitting me, I'm trying to save his life. So Dana performs CPR and she saves the kid, and the kid's name is Rufus. The kid, he reunites with his mom, and while Dana's trying to figure out what happened, she hears this man ask what's going on, and she turns around and she's looking down the barrel of a rifle. And she's like, what in the world is going on here? And she's scared and she's trying to figure out what's going on. And before anything else can happen, she reappears back in her house, but she's not in the same spot that she was before. She's a few feet away and she's covered in mud and water. And Kevin is like frozen. And so when she reappears, she asks what happened. And Kevin's like, how did you get over there? And she's like, I don't know. One minute I was here, next minute I'm in the woods, and then I'm back here in this new spot. And Kevin's like, well, you were only gone for a few seconds. I saw you disappear right before my eyes. And so Dana explains what happens, and she feels like Kevin doesn't believe her, but he's kind of forced to believe her because he witnessed it with his own eyes. And so Dana, she kind of freaks out. She starts freaking out about the whole incident. She's like, I don't want it to happen again. And Kevin's like, well, he tells her to just put it out her mind, but he tells her in a way that's like, it's gentle. It's not like supposed to be dismissive, because Dana's like, oh, I feel like I'm already starting to forget it. And Kevin's like, well, go ahead and forget it and just hope it doesn't happen again. And so Dana, she feels unsafe now because she feels like it can happen again. And so that's how the chapter ends. I like the writing, but the only thing with this chapter, this specific chapter, it just kind of went really fast. Like, one minute she's shelving books, next minute she's in the woods, then she's back and she's freaking out. And I'm like, okay, for the character, I'm like, I understand that you're freaking out because this happened to you and it took place over some time. But for me, this all happened within a span of 5 minutes. So I'm like, okay, this kind of went a little fast. Hold on. It's like the emotional weight wasn't really felt because it's like, well, this happened to you, but it went so fast for me. It's like, hold on. But I'm still excited to read this book. Today is February 23rd. I am still reading Kindred. I finished the chapter titled The Fire. Dana, she tries to take Kevin's advice and she tries to forget what's happened to her, but she can't forget because it ends up happening again while they're sitting at the table eating dinner. And Dana finds herself in this room and she sees this boy, this redhead boy, burning curtains. She like snatches the curtains down and she puts the fire out and she throws them out the window, and she's like, okay, the danger is sorted out, so why haven't I gotten home yet? And so we find out that the boy is Rufus, but it's Rufus when he's a little older. And Dana figures that she's somewhere in the South because the boy sounds like he has a Southern accent. And so when Dana finds out that it's Rufus, she asks Rufus if he remembers her, and he vaguely remembers, but he doesn't really remember because he was unconscious. And he says that his mom is the one who really filled him in on who Dana was, and they all thought that she was a man because she had on pants, and that's why they all freaked out. And so Dana, she suspects that Rufus is the reason why she keeps reappearing where she's reappearing, and she thinks that Rufus is somehow connected to her going back and forth between where he is and where she's supposed to be. And she discovers that she not only travels distances, but she also travels across time. So while her and Rufus are talking and they're trying to figure out what's going on, Rufus calls her the N-word, and Dana tells him not to call her that, and he's kind of confused on why, because he's like, that's how we refer to all like black people here. But Dana's like, she makes it clear that if he has to call her something, to either just call her a black woman or just call her by her name, which is Dana. And so Dana learns that Rufus set the fire because his father hit him for stealing and for lying about stealing. And Dana learns that Rufus has previously burned down his father's stuff. He burned down the stable because his dad wanted to sell a horse that he wanted, but his dad wouldn't give him the horse, so he sold the horse. And Rufus, in retaliation for it, he burned the stable down. And so because this time he got beat for stealing and lying, Rufus decided to burn the house down, basically like, oh, well, maybe this will punish my dad. But he realizes that he doesn't want to burn the house down, but he can't put the fire out. And so that's when Dana appeared. And so Dana figures that Rufus summons her to where he is whenever he gets in trouble. Dana learns that the year is 1815. They're in Maryland, and they're on what's called the Wayland Plantation, which is the plantation that Rufus's father owns. And Dana, she realizes that the name Wayland sounds familiar. And so she starts asking questions, and she tells Rufus that her full name is E. Dana, but everybody calls her Dana for short. And she starts asking Rufus about this girl named Alice. She's like, is there a girl named Alice that lives around here? And Rufus is like, oh yeah, she's a free woman and she lives with her mom out in the woods. And Dana starts to suspect that Rufus is her ancestor because one of her ancestors named Hagar kept a record of the family in this old Bible, and she listed Rufus and Alice as her parents. And so Dana's like, okay, so Rufus might be my ancestor, but how did Rufus and Alice get together? Because Rufus is white and Alice is black. But she's like, it has to be them because they have the same name and they're listed in the family Bible as my ancestors. And this family Bible has been passed down through the generations, and it's kind of like the family's way of keeping record of the family lineage. And so once Dana learns who Rufus really is, she suspects that she's there to keep Rufus alive so that she can eventually be born. She's like, that doesn't make sense because Rufus would have had to have lived for me to be born anyways. She doesn't want to question the paradox of it all, so she's like, it is what it is. Rufus tells Dana since she wants to be called by name that she has to call him Mr. or Master, because if his father heard her calling him by name, he would get really upset about it. And so Dana's like, okay, if anyone else is around, then I'll call you that, but when we're just by ourselves, I'm going to call you Rufus. Rufus reveals that he heard Dana and Kevin talking before she appeared. And so Dana is like, okay, so Rufus is connected to me appearing somehow. And she basically asks Rufus to help her escape the house before his father wakes up and discovers her and something bad happens. So Rufus helps her sneak out and he tells her how to get to Alice's house. And so Dana, she tries to take Rufus's shortcut, but she gets lost. So she finds her way back to the main road. And while she's walking the main road, she hears people coming, and so she ducks off the road and hides, and it's these white men passing by. And so she, on a hunch, follows the white men to this cabin. And when they get to the cabin, they break into the cabin and they throw the whole family that's in the cabin out, and they're all naked except for the little girl. They tie the man up to a tree and they whip him because he was supposed to have a pass to leave the plantation, but he didn't have a pass. And the woman, she has to stand by and watch, and she's upset, and the child is upset. And so after they whip him, they tie him to the back of a horse and they drag him back to the plantation. One of the patrollers stayed behind to basically proposition the woman, and she refuses, so he punches her and he runs off. And so Dana, she decides to take it upon herself to help the lady and the little girl, and she discovers that the little girl is Alice and that this is the cabin she was looking for. And the lady, of course, she's skeptical about who Dana is, so Dana lies and says that she's a free woman from New York and that she was carried off due to the fugitive slave law, and so she's trying to get back to New York to her husband. And so Alice's mother basically tells Dana she can stay the night and then she's going to help her get to someone else who can help her get back to New York. And so she tells Dana, oh, I left my blanket outside, because she was covering herself when she first got thrown out and they snatched the blanket off her. So Dana's like, oh, I'll go outside and get your blanket. So when she goes outside, she's attacked by the patroller from earlier who wanted Alice's mother, and he's like, oh, you look like Alice's mother. And he's like, who are you? And she doesn't answer, and he's like, well, it doesn't matter because you probably a runaway anyway, so I wonder how much you'll cost. And so Dana, she tries to fight off the patroller, is not successful at first, but she manages to do enough to run away. But he chases her down and he beats her up really badly, tries to attempt to assault her, but Dana, she manages to grab a tree branch and knock him out. And after she knocks him out, she passes out. And so after she faints, she wakes up and she realizes she's back in the present with Kevin. And so when Kevin tried to wake her up, she thought he was the patroller, so she starts trying to attack him. And he's like, Dana, it's me. And so after she gets back and she explains to Kevin what went down, Kevin basically is like, okay, he's still kind of skeptical, but he knows something is wrong, so he starts trying to take preventative measures. He ties a tote bag to Dana to basically, if she disappears, she has supplies to survive. He tries to give her a knife to fend for herself, but he doesn't believe that she'll actually use it. And so Dana shows him, yes, I will, because I'm not trying to die and be put in slavery. And Kevin basically is like, I'm going to take you to the hospital. And Dana's like, don't take me to the hospital, because what if I disappear from the hospital and nobody knows what's going on? He and Dana come up with this idea to forge free papers for her to prove that she's a free woman. But because there's no example of free papers in any of the Black history books that they look through, they don't know how to forge it. And so instead, Dana decides she's going to write a note to basically like act as a pass that she's allowed to be off the plantation, and she's going to use a map of Maryland to get to the north, basically. in case she goes back. But Kevin makes her realize very quickly that there was no railroad system in place at the time of where Rufus is, and so that idea is quickly abandoned. And so Kevin theorizes that it's Rufus's fear that brings Dana there, because he's afraid that he's going to die because of what he's done. And so Dana's fear of dying is what brings her back to the present. And so Dana's like, okay, so if I get in a situation, then I really have to believe that I'm dying in order to get back. But she's like, if the crisis is averted and I feel I'm no longer in danger, I'm not going to come back. And so Kevin still doesn't really understand why Dana is so afraid of being there. Like, he has like a general idea, but he's not really grasping the nuances because Kevin is white. And Dana, she's trying her hardest to explain it to him, but he's not getting it. And so that's how the chapter ends. It basically ends with them basically like theorizing, and Kevin's basically like, I'm here for you in the best way I can be, and I'll be here in case you end up going back and you have to come back. And Dana's like, as long as you're here for me, I know I'll be okay. I'm enjoying this book. The next chapter is the fall. I think their theory is, I don't want to say it's wrong, but I don't think the way they're theorizing it is going to work. I feel like they have this assumption that it's her fear that brings her back and Rufus's fear that takes her there. But I feel like their theory is not going to work. I feel like now that they have this knowledge of how she gets there and how she gets back, they're going to rely on that, and it's going to end up failing her, but we'll see. Today is February 24th. I finished reading The Fall from Kindred, so let's go over it. So the chapter starts with Dana. She's filling the reader in on how she met Kevin. She met Kevin when she was working out of a casual labor agency. The job she was working at was as an inventory counter in an auto parts warehouse, and Kevin also worked there. She would work in this warehouse during the day, and then at night she'd go work on her novel because she wanted to be a published author. So when she meets Kevin, the first time they meet, Kevin tells her she looks like a zombie. She always looks tired, and that's because she's working 2 jobs. He basically asks Dana to have lunch with him, and so she accepts. And we find out that Kevin's full name is Kevin Franklin, and he is a published author. He's published 3 books. His latest book has garnered him enough money to live on until he can publish the next book, but his books don't sell well. They get to know each other. Dana learns that Kevin is 12 years older than her and that both of their parents are dead. And so after like a week of lunches, they go on their first date. And after their first date, Dana realizes just how lonely she really was. We come back to the present. Dana does not want to go to the library with Kevin because she's concerned that what causes her to go back to the past will happen while they're out, and she's worried where they'll reappear when they come back to the present. While she and Kevin are basically discussing her not wanting to go to the library, she starts to disappear again. But this time, Kevin, he grabs onto her and he holds onto her. And so when they disappear together. So they both go back to 1815 together. This time, what's happened is Rufus has fallen from a tree and broken his leg. He's laying on the ground, and then he had one of the enslaved boys with him. His name is Nigel. And so basically, Kevin tells Nigel to go back and get help while he and Dana stay with Rufus. Rufus immediately recognizes Dana, so when they're sitting there talking, waiting for Nigel to come back with help, Rufus asks who Kevin is, and Kevin slips up and says that he's Dana's husband. And Rufus is confused because he's like, white people and black people can't marry in his time. And so he's confused, and so Dana and Kevin decide to tell him the truth about who they are, and he doesn't believe them at first until they show some evidence. They show him some coins from the years that they were made, and so he's like, I'm still confused, but I guess I believe you, even though it sounds weird. And so Kevin and Dana, they don't know how long they're going to be in this time, so they're like, we're going to play the role of master and slave in order to mask why we are here. So Kevin is playing the role of the master and Dana is his slave. Nigel comes back with Rufus's father, Tom Whalen. Tom is very dismissive towards Rufus and the fact that he's falling out the tree and broken his leg. He's more concerned about how much it's going to cost than he is Rufus's well-being. And he talks to Kevin, and basically Kevin feeds him a story of who they are and how they found Rufus, and basically Rufus convinces his father to let Kevin and Dana come back with them to the plantation. And when they get there, Rufus refuses to let Dana go, so Dana basically has to go with him to his room. And while they're in his room, his mother Margaret comes rushing in. She's all worried and concerned, and she doesn't like Dana. She vaguely remembers Dana, but not enough to figure out that she's the same girl from the river. She doesn't like Dana, and she basically tells Dana to go to the cookhouse to get some food in a rude way. And so Dana, she's on her way down to the cookhouse, and she comes across this slave girl who can't talk. And the slave girl's name is Carrie. Carrie takes her to the cookhouse where she meets the rest of the slaves, Luke, who is Nigel's father, and Sarah, who is Carrie's mother. Carrie is the only child that Sarah was allowed to keep, and that's why she doesn't like the Waylands like that, because they sold all her other children. And so after they get settled in, Kevin takes Dana to privacy, and Dana is worried that if she starts to disappear while they're separated, that he'll get left behind in 1815. And Kevin, he's listening to her concerns, but he's not really fully understanding the ramifications. But he secured himself a position as Rufus's tutor, and basically he's explained that he's a novelist from New York, and he was traveling down south when he was robbed, and the only thing that he had left from the robbery was Dana, who was his slave. He basically told Tom that the plan was for them to get down south, and when he got down south he was going to sell Dana in Louisiana for money, which Tom obviously approved of, and he tricked her into staying with him by promising that he'd take her back to New York because he said that she was a free woman that was captured and brought into slavery. And so Dana and Kevin, they agree to steer Rufus in the right direction, away from being like Tom Whalen. So Dana, she decides to take the role of being a slave very seriously. She learns how to cook, she learns how to clean, but Margaret can't find any reason to complain about her, so she makes up a reason. She says that the coffee that Dana served her was too cold, but it wasn't, so she threw the coffee at Dana, and it was scalding hot, but most of it missed. And so Kevin finds out about Margaret throwing the coffee, and he suggests that he and Dana leave the plantation and go elsewhere, but Dana's like, no, I want to stick to the plan that we came up with. But Kevin, he's really still not understanding the ramifications of where they're at. And so Dana reassures him that she can handle whatever's happening at that plantation. But Kevin's like, well, I've seen where the slaves sleep, and I don't like that. I want you sleeping in my room. And Dana's like, I don't think that's a good idea. But Kevin's not having it, so she ends up having to go along with it. And Kevin reveals that Margaret is showing romantic interest in him, which causes Dana to get upset, but she can't really do anything about it because it's 1815. When they get done talking, Rufus basically summons Dana to come read to him because Kevin let it slip that Dana could read and write. And I'm like, Kevin, why would you do that? You are putting Dana in even more danger. And so Dana, she goes up there, and Rufus wants her to read to him. And so she reads Robinson Crusoe, and while she's reading, they also get to talking. We find out that Tom was previously married to a woman named Hannah, and that's where his other kids on the plantation that are his come from. And Margaret does not like those kids, and she mistreats them horribly. Rufus does not go to school because the teacher told him he was too stupid for school, but Dana encourages him to prove the school teacher wrong. And we also find out that Alice and her mother are fine, and that Dana's actions really didn't cause anything bad to happen to them. They're still alive. They're still where they were at when she left previously. And Rufus also told Margaret that Dana was the same person that saved him at the river, but Margaret doesn't believe him, and he only did this to try to get Margaret to like Dana more because he's worried about Dana, and he likes Dana, and he doesn't want her to get in any trouble. And after they get done talking, Dana leaves the room, and Tom basically confronts her and tells her that he heard her reading to Rufus. He basically questions her on her background, and basically she matches her story up to Kevin's, and Tom basically hints that he wants to buy Dana to work in his house as a tutor to Rufus. Cut the middleman out and have Dana working for him for free. And basically she tells Kevin this, and Kevin's like, Dana, be careful. And so the next day, Tom catches a field hand doing something he doesn't like, so he calls all the slaves to come witness him whip the field hand and scare them basically into obedience. And Dana, she has moved into Kevin's room, and basically everyone on the plantation knows that she provides relations to Kevin. That is their understanding of the relationship. And most of the people really don't say anything about it, but when Margaret finds out, she marches up to Dana and slaps her and tells her that she's going to have her removed from the house and put in the quarters with the other slaves. But Margaret does not follow through on the threat because Tom basically refuses to do that. And so Dana, she goes to the cookhouse to talk to Sarah. Sarah reveals that it was Margaret's idea to sell all her kids, and she tells Dana that she should use her looks and her good relationship with Kevin to convince him to set her free while she's still young and has her beauty. And Dana asks Sarah if she tried to do that, and Sarah doesn't answer. And so Dana has taken to cleaning the library, and so while she's in there cleaning the library, she's reading the books. But one day Tom catches her reading, and he basically tells her, you can read to my son and that's it, but I better not catch you reading my books again, and you're banned from cleaning this library. Carrie will clean it instead. And so basically, after that confrontation, Nigel approaches her and asks her to help teach him how to read, and Dana agrees. And she takes a book from the library, a primary reader, to teach him how to read, and she begins teaching him how to read. And Sarah, she knows about it, and she conceals it, but she's basically like, as long as the master don't find out, then we're good. And Luke also knows about it, but he doesn't say anything. Dana realizes how quickly her and Kevin got acclimated to the lives of slavery, and she realizes it when one day she and Kevin are talking and they witness some kids playing slave auction. And that really upsets her because she's like, this is their life, that's basically their future, and that's all they know, and that's all they'll ever know. And Kevin basically tells her, well, we know that slavery eventually is going to end, so why are you so upset about it? And Dana's like, because even though we know it's going to end, they still have to go through it, they still have to experience it, and it heavily affects her. And basically, Kevin still is not understanding the ramifications like Dana is, because he is white, and so he's not fully understanding why Dana is so affected by it. And so Rufus gets into it with Tom, and so as retaliation, Tom bans Dana from reading to Rufus for about 4 days. And so when she finally is allowed to read to him again, Margaret comes to observe, and basically Margaret is fawning over him and babying him, and Rufus gets really upset and yells at her. And Dana's like, Rufus, don't you think that's disrespectful? And Rufus is like, no, because I have to yell at her in order to get her to do what I want her to do. And Dana realizes that Rufus is starting to act like Tom. And so after she reads to Rufus, she goes back to the cookhouse and discovers that Nigel is teaching Carrie to read. And so she agrees to teach Carrie to read, but Carrie has stolen a book from the library, and Dana tells her to return it. And so while Carrie is doing that, Dana quizzes Nigel on his spelling, and after they get done, Dana basically takes the primary reader from him, and Tom Whalen comes into the cookhouse and discovers her with the book in her hand. He gets really upset. He's like, I've treated you really well. I've made sure you were taken care of, and this is how you repay me, by stealing from my library. And he basically drags her out of the cookhouse into the field, and he basically beats on her, and he whips her. And while she's getting whipped, she realizes she's starting to disappear because she's in danger. And Kevin is running towards her, and she screams because she wants Kevin to get to her in time so they can go back together. And that's how the chapter ends. We don't know if Kevin made it or not. So with this, I'm about over 100 pages in, so hopefully I should be done with this pretty soon. Today is February 27th. I just finished reading The Fight in Kindred. Where we left off, Dana was being whipped and she disappeared. The fight opens with Dana thinking about how she and Kevin, when they started their relationship, how they really didn't move in with each other. They just drifted back and forth between each other's apartments. And Kevin wanted Dana to quit her job at the agency, but she didn't want to because she liked the independence that the agency gave her. She didn't want to give up that small bit of independence that she did have, so she kept her job at the agency. And Kevin, he wanted her to type up his novels for him, but Dana, she also hates typing. She doesn't write her novels in the correct format until it's time to finally put it together and edit it. Kevin asked her 3 times to type his novels, and she was like, no. And each time he got more and more upset. The next day she came back, and Kevin's like, what are you doing here? And Dana's like, you didn't expect me to come back. And Kevin basically just lets her in. Kevin ends up proposing marriage to her, but Dana's like, well, what does your family think about me? And what will my family think about you? And Kevin's like, oh, I'm sure my family will be fine with it. The only family I have left is my sister. And so Dana tells Kevin to brace himself for the idea that his sister might not accept Dana. But Kevin is like, no, I'm sure she'll accept you. So when he tells his sister about Dana, she basically reveals how racist she is and that she does not accept Dana. And Kevin is shocked by this, but he feels like his sister is only acting this way because she's married a racist man, and that she doesn't truly believe what she was saying. He uses the fact that she had a black friend back when they were in like high school to kind of explain his reasoning why he believes that she's just saying stuff that her husband has put in her head, and it's not really what she truly believes. Dana is basically like, yeah, okay. And she told her aunt and uncle that she chose to marry Kevin. Her aunt and uncle were like parents to her, and they did not take it well. Her aunt kind of forgave Dana for choosing to marry Kevin because she says that Dana would have pretty babies that were prettier than Dana, and what she means by that is that the babies would be lighter skinned than Dana. So Dana kind of took that a little hard. And then her uncle, he's not approving of it because Kevin is white, and he feels like it's better for him to leave everything he had intended to leave Dana. He feels it's better to leave it all as a donation to the church than to leave it to Dana, because he doesn't want everything he's worked so hard to achieve and worked so hard for it to fall into the hands of a white man. And that's what he tells Dana. And he's not approving of the match, and he feels betrayed that Dana chose to marry a white man instead of marrying a black man. Neither of their families take the news well, and they decide to just go to Vegas and get married and basically live their lives. So Dana wakes up in her bathroom. She realizes that Kevin got left behind in 1815, and she's upset about it. She cleans herself up and starts preparing for the next time she goes back. She starts gathering a whole bunch of supplies. She gathers some things that didn't exist in 1815, like toothbrushes, toothpaste, aspirin, sleeping pills. She gets some clothes together. She doesn't have any dresses that will help her fit into the time, so she decides to continue wearing pants because everybody expects her to wear pants at that point. She takes a book on Black history that has maps in it, so that way if she finds that she needs to run, she has a map with her to guide her. She is in the present in 1976 for 8 days. During that time, she's scared to go anywhere because she feels like she could disappear at any moment. While she was in 1815, she was gone for 2 months, but she realizes that when she comes back, she's only been gone for like a few hours. Only a day has passed since she's been back because she fell asleep as soon as she got back and rested. But even though it's been only a few hours, her back is still torn up from being whipped and it's still fresh. She's scared to go out anywhere because she's scared she's going to disappear again. So she calls her cousin to bring her groceries, and her cousin suspects that Kevin has been beating on her, but Dana reassures her cousin that Kevin has not been beating on her and that she just had an accident. And so after 8 days, Dana is returned to 1815 because Rufus is getting beat up. He's fighting with this black man over a black girl who's standing there. He is completely tore up. He is losing that fight badly. And the reason Dana feels she was called because she feels like Rufus was scared he was actually going to be killed in the fight. And so Dana, she examines the scene. She sees that Rufus is being terribly beaten up by this black man, and she sees that the black girl that they are fighting over, her dress is torn. So she puts 2 and 2 together that Rufus probably did something to the girl that he wasn't supposed to do, and the black man is defending the black girl because of it. So she goes over to try and intervene in the fight, and the girl recognizes her. The black man does not, and he's wondering why Dana is showing any interest and why she wants Rufus to live so badly. And Dana's basically like, I'm doing this for your own protection. What's going to happen if they find out that you killed this white man? And the guy is like, well, they're not going to find out, basically insinuating that he'll kill Rufus and Dana to keep it quiet. And we find out that the black man, his name is Isaac, and the girl he was fighting over is Alice, who is now grown. And Alice and Isaac are married, but Rufus does not like that. He wants Alice to himself, and he basically tried to sell Isaac to get Alice to himself. And so Dana, with Alice's help, convinces Isaac to take Alice and run away and leave Dana to worry about Rufus, because Alice knows that Dana is someone that they can trust. But Isaac doesn't trust her, but he listens to Alice because Alice begs him to run away and leave things to Dana to fix. And so Isaac and Alice leave, and Alice warns Dana that Rufus is not the same Rufus. He tends to be very mean, and he tends to do things that are very weird. When he gets upset, he starts acting out very badly. And so Alice warns Dana of this, and then she and Isaac leave. And then Rufus wakes up, and Dana basically nurses his wounds. He has 2 black eyes. His lip is busted. He's possibly missing some teeth, and his ribs are broken. He got whooped. And Alice also tells Dana that Kevin went north, and he waited for her for a little bit, and then he went north, and he came back like 2 times to try and find her. But after he realized she still wasn't back, he went north, and he's been up north since. Rufus, of course, he wakes up, and Dana questions him on why he and Isaac were fighting over Alice, and Rufus basically explains that he wants Alice to himself. He doesn't like Isaac. And Rufus is about 18 at this point. He's a little drunk, and he explains that once he gets his hands on Isaac, Isaac is as good as dead. Dana, of course, has put the pieces together, and so she asks Rufus, did he assault Alice? And Rufus doesn't deny it. He kind of guiltily just looks away. And Dana basically tells Rufus that what he did was wrong, but Rufus argues her down because he doesn't understand why it was wrong, because he wants Alice and he should have Alice. And so they go back and forth about it. Dana argues with him to try and get him to see that he was wrong, but Rufus only wants revenge on Isaac for beating him up so badly, and he wants Alice to himself. And Dana is disgusted with Rufus, and she basically resolves that her mission now is to ensure that Alice safely has Hagar and finds Kevin, and she does not care what happens to Rufus because obviously her attempt to influence Rufus to do right has failed. And so they're arguing, and Rufus basically threatens Dana and tells her that if she doesn't help him, that she'll never be able to find Kevin without him. And Dana basically lets Rufus know, well, I mean, you need my help too, because obviously you get in these situations where you about to die and I have to come save you. But now that you're grown, I might not be able to save you because I'm a woman and you fighting these grown men, and I'm not strong enough to be breaking that up. So Dana is sent to get Waylon for help, and Rufus explains that Waylon saw Dana disappear when she was being whipped, and he's kind of scared of Dana now. So Dana, she goes for help, and when she gets to the plantation, everyone recognizes her instantly, except for this new white guy. This new white guy on the plantation questions who she is, and Dana says that she's there to get help from Mr. Rufus, and the guy asks, is he drunk? And Dana says he's a little drunk, and the white guy, of course, he's like, ugh, this idiot. And he basically takes Dana in the house to go get Waylon. And so while Dana's waiting on the new guy, whose name is Jake, to get Waylon, another girl comes into the house, and it's Carrie, but she's older and pregnant. And she sees Dana and she hugs her and she's happy to see her. Nigel comes around with the wagon. He recognizes Dana too, and he's grown. All the black people on the plantation are happy to see Dana and happy to see that she's okay. And so Nigel, Dana, and Waylon, they go to recover Rufus, and when they get back home, Waylon confronts Dana and says that he knew it was her and that he's wondering why she doesn't look any different. He tells her that Kevin has gone north and that he's come back a few times to try and reclaim her, but she wasn't there. And he basically tells Dana she can stay on the plantation, but she's got to work just like she was last time. And Dana, of course, already knew this, so she's not surprised. And basically, he puts her to work as Rufus's nurse. Rufus and Kevin both try to explain how Dana disappeared to Waylon. He couldn't deny it because he witnessed it, but he didn't really understand it. And Nigel saw too. So Nigel knows that something is different about Dana. And Nigel is now married to Carrie, and it's his baby that she's pregnant with, and he is glad that Isaac got away. Dana is nursing Rufus after getting beat up by Isaac as he deserved. Rufus claims that he'll protect Dana from being mistreated by Waylon until Kevin comes to reclaim her. And Dana basically in return explains the time paradox to him because Rufus questioned where does she go when she's not there. And so basically she explains the time paradox and how, like, well, even though months and years pass in their time, when she gets back to her home only a few minutes or hours have passed. And Rufus kind of understands, but he's kind of like still confused about it a little bit. Rufus shows Dana letters that Kevin has written, basically asking them to let them know when Dana returns, and he promises Dana that he will write to Kevin and let him know that she's back. And so then after that happens, the doctor comes, and the doctor is basically like very ignorant, and he treats Dana like she doesn't know what she's doing. So after she answers all his questions, they send her away to the cookhouse where she talks with Sarah. That's where she learns that Margaret has been sent away to Baltimore for losing her mind after her twins died. She also learns that Jake is the new overseer of the plantation, and she questions why Waylon needed an overseer in the first place. And she learns that Nigel's father, Luke, has been sold because he was too obedient and he played the game of being a slave too well and basically outsmarted the system to ensure that he never got punished. Luke was too smart and he gamed the system and he got sent away for it because Waylon didn't like that because he felt like Luke was being a little too smart. And he doesn't like people that are too smart. And so after Luke was sold, Nigel, he tried to run away and he failed. And he was brought back and he was horribly whipped for it. And it basically ensured that he would never run away again. Rufus is still getting better. Dana is still helping nurse him back to health. He allows her to write a letter to Kevin herself. And while she's doing so, he goes through her things and he finds a book about Black history and he starts reading it. And Dana realizes that if Rufus reads too much of that book, he'll learn about events that haven't taken place yet. So she takes the book from him. And while he's reading the book, he hates it because he doesn't understand if slavery is going to end eventually. Why do the people in the book keep complaining about it? And he feels like the book is just trash and that the history just is not important. And so Dana and Rufus, they get to arguing about Alice because Dana does not like that Rufus did what he did, and Rufus reveals that he was the one who had been writing to Kevin and keeping him updated about what was going on as far as when Dana would reappear. And he's the one who's been kind of keeping the communication open between Kevin and the plantation. And so because he reveals that he's the one that's been keeping Kevin informed, In return, he wants Dana to burn the history book, and he also wants her to burn the map that she tore out of the book because he doesn't trust her to not run away. And he wants her to stay there with him. And Dana's like, well, even if I burn the map, I can still get off the plantation without it. And Rufus is like, well, it'll make me feel better if you burn it anyways. And so she burns it. It's a way to show that Rufus can trust her. 4 days later, Isaac and Alice are caught. But Dana doesn't know that they were caught until like day 7. Because what happened was they were caught, they were whipped and beaten, and Alice got bit up by dogs. The only reason Dana found out that they had been caught was because Rufus went to town to mail her letter, and he came back with Alice. And Dana found out that Rufus basically purchased Alice and saved her from being sent down south. While Rufus is down there getting Alice, Sarah and Dana, they talk about freedom and what it would be like to be free. And Sarah rejects the idea because she has become like the lady of the house in a sense. Like she's running the house, and Dana basically says that she's like a mammy, and how she at first didn't respect Sarah for being a mammy, but now she does because she sees how hard of a life Sarah has led. And so Rufus returns with Alice, and she's of course badly wounded, and Dana is responsible for nursing her back to health. And Alice is placed in Rufus's room to recover for the time being, and he promises Dana that he won't try anything with her while she's recovering. And we find out that Isaac has been sold to Mississippi, and he had his ears cut off as a punishment. Sarah basically tells Dana to ensure that Rufus actually sent her letter and to check with Nigel, because Rufus has been known to give his word to do things and then not follow through. And Sarah, while she's advising Dana on what to do, she wonders if Kevin will really come back for Dana, because it's been 5 years and he came back twice, and both times Dana was not there. So she wonders if he really loves her enough to come back for her like that. And so Dana checks with Nigel, and Nigel says that he's not sure whether Rufus sent the letter because he was sent off to go run an errand, and then he came back, and when he came back he saw that Rufus had Alice. So after talking with Nigel, Dana goes to talk to Rufus and ask him herself how long will it take to get a response from Kevin. And Rufus is unsure of the length of time, and he kind of dances around her questions. And so Alice, she has to relearn everything. She's in such a state of shock that her mind is like that of a child, and so she's kind of like mentally having to regrow to being an adult and relearn everything. And so at first she's clinging to Dana and Rufus because Dana looks like her mom, and Rufus, she remembers Rufus as being a friend in her childhood. So she's clinging to them both heavily. And after 3 weeks, Alice has gotten better enough to be around the age of 13 mentally, and she thinks that she's still a free woman. And around that same time, Carrie has her baby, and that the baby is going to stay with them on the plantation because Nigel has hired himself out enough to make enough money to build a cabin on the plantation to ensure that he, Carrie, and his family have a place to stay. And so while Carrie is having the baby, Sarah goes to help with the childbirth, leaving Dana to cook all the food. And so while Dana's cooking the dinner, she and Alice talk, and Alice confronts Dana on what she's hiding because she's like, Dana, it's obvious that you're hiding something from me. I can see it. Alice questions, what's it like to be a slave? And Dana's like, I don't know because I just became a slave like a few days ago. Alice is like, so you were free and you let them drag you back to slavery? And Dana's like, yes. And Alice like, I would never let that happen to me. I'm a free woman through and through, just like my mother. And my mother told me it's better to be dead than to be a slave. And so Dana keeps giving her like these looks, and Alice is like, okay, what is it? Why do you keep looking at me like that? And Dana is like reluctant to answer. So Alice is like, starts putting pieces together. She's like, Dana, am I a slave? And Dana answers and tells her, yes, she's a slave. And Alice is like, how am I a slave when I was a free woman? And Dana's like, you are a slave now because you committed a crime of helping another slave try to run away. And Rufus basically purchased you to keep you from being sold south. And so Alice is like, well, what slave was I trying to help run away? And Dana tells her that she has to remember on her own, but Alice presses her. And so Dana basically asks her, do you even remember how you got hurt? And Alice, she starts thinking about it, and it starts flooding back to her, and she realizes that she got hurt trying to help Isaac escape, and she starts freaking out, and she's like, where's Isaac? And so Dana tells her, and Alice is just like, she's in a mood for the rest of the day because she realizes everything that's gone on, and she very much hates Rufus for what he's done, and she hates Dana for not working harder to defend her and keep her away from Rufus, knowing what Rufus had done to her. But Dana says she had no choice because Rufus is the master, and she did want to create trouble for her and Alice, but Alice is not trying to hear it. She's like, you should have protected me, and you didn't. And so she's very upset with Dana, and she's super pissed off with Rufus and hates them both. And so the baby is born, and they named the baby Jude. And about a month has passed since Dana sent her letter to Kevin, and she got no response. So she questions Rufus on it. Rufus is like, maybe it's just slow. Because now Alice remembers, and because she's recovered well enough, he wants Dana to help convince Alice to sleep with him. And Dana's like, I'm not doing that. And so Rufus is like, well, if you don't convince her to sleep with me, I'm going to beat her until she does. And Dana is like, why would you force her to sleep with you? And Rufus is like, because I love her and I can and I want her and I can have her. And Dana and him, they go back and forth on it because Dana is not willing to bend. And Rufus, he shows his true colors. He basically tells Dana Waylon wants him to sleep with her instead of Alice because he feels like Dana would give him less trouble. And he basically taunts Dana about Kevin not returning, basically theorizes that Kevin's probably already left her for another woman and that Dana should just accept that she's going to be there forever. But Dana's not trying to hear it. So Rufus threatens to beat Alice into submission, and Dana reluctantly agrees to talk to her. And so Dana goes out to the cookhouse to talk to Alice. Alice has taken on the role of basically caring for the children and sewing, which is something that angers another slave named Lisa, because that was Lisa's role. And now Lisa feels that now that Alice is kind of encroaching on her territory, Lisa's going to be sent off to the fields to work. And so Dana goes out there to talk to Alice, and Alice has sewn her a dress to replace her pants and stuff because she says she's tired of Dana wearing them pants. Alice gives her the dress and is like, okay, so what's wrong? Because you're looking at me like something's wrong. And Dana's like, Rufus wants you to sleep with him. And Alice doesn't know what to do because she hates Rufus. She does not want to sleep with him, but she's too scared to run away again because the first time was too traumatic to her. Alice is known to have very violent mood swings because sometimes she'll be very sweet to Dana, and then all of a sudden, in the same breath, in the same conversation, she start attacking Dana and start beating on her, and Dana just accepts it and lets her because she knows that Alice is raging and she wants Alice to get all her rage out, and it's better for Alice to take all the rage out on her than to take it out on Rufus and Waylon and have something really bad happen to her. So Alice, she rages for a little bit about the request, and then she asks Dana what she should do, and Dana's like, you have to make the decision. And Alice is like, I don't want to sleep with him, I'd rather run than sleep with him. Like, okay, if you run, then I'll buy you some time. And Alice is like, no, I'm not going to run because I'm not trying to go through that again. And Dana's like, well, you got three options. So you can either go to him without a fight, he can come and beat you into submission and then take you and you'll be hurt again, or you can run. She reluctantly agrees, but not before calling Dana a future mammy, because she says that Dana acts just like Sarah. And she says that Dana is like very much acting like a white person. And she tells Dana that Dana is a future mammy because she's always running around trying to please the white people, trying to please the masters. And then after that, she reluctantly agrees to go sleep with Rufus because she realizes Dana's just trying to protect her, and she hates every second of it, as she should. So after that happens, another month passes, and there's still no word from Kevin. Rufus is enjoying life because he has Dana and Alice to himself. Alice has kind of become subdued and quiet and just kind of like defeated in life, so she's just kind of accepted that as long as she does what Rufus tells her to do, her life will be as okay as possible. And Dana, of course, is suffering because she misses Kevin, she doesn't have Kevin, and she's basically subject to Rufus's whims as well because she is taxed with taking care of him in addition to whatever else she decides to do on the plantation. And Dana is also subject to him because he knows that as long as he continues to threaten the lives of the others, Dana will do whatever he wants because Dana's not trying to jeopardize anybody else's life. And so Rufus uses that against her and uses that to force her into doing things she doesn't want to do. And so Dana decides that she has to get north by any means possible and find Kevin. So one day she's out with this other girl named Tess. Tess is a slave. She works in the washroom, and Dana would go and help her in the washroom. And so to basically repay Dana for helping her in the washroom, Tess would come and help her in the kitchen while Carrie was recovering from the baby and Sarah was helping with that. And so basically one day while Dana is out washing clothes with Tess, Alice comes and shows two letters to Dana. and it's the 2 letters that she wrote to Kevin, and she discovers that they were not mailed. They were just opened and put in Rufus's little bed chest. And so Dana realizes that Rufus never mailed the letters and he lied to her. So Dana decides that she's gonna run that night. She packs up all her stuff and she goes about her day as usual, like everything's fine and dandy. And then at night she goes to lay down with the rest of the other slaves in the attic so that everyone can say that she was there. And then in the middle of the night, she decides to run, and she reveals that was basically her downfall because she overplanned. She gets a good distance. She's managed to fend for herself a little bit and fight off a dog that tried to attack her. So she's feeling good and confident about her skills to make it to the north. But right as daylight starts coming in, she gets to this town and she hears horses coming down the road. So she jumps in the bushes and hides. And while she's hiding, she gets a glimpse at who's riding the horses, and it's Rufus and Waylon. And she's so shocked that she accidentally snaps a twig, and that causes them to stop and search the area. Waylon goes one direction, but Rufus goes to where she is, and he basically causes his horse to stomp around in the bushes. And Dana, of course, not wanting to be stomped out by the horse, she jumps out and tries to run, but Rufus grabs her and holds her down and basically wrestles her down to try and calm her down. And he tells Waylon that he found Dana, and Waylon comes over and kicks her in the face, and that knocks her unconscious. So when she wakes up, she's on the back of Rufus's horse, and Rufus basically stops and gets her cleaned up, cleans off her face, and tells her she was stupid for running away. Why would she do something like that? And he basically gets her cleaned up a little bit, and they continue on to the plantation. And while they're riding up there, he puts her in front of him on the saddle to ensure that she doesn't try and escape. And so while they're riding up there, Rufus tells her that she's going to be whipped. And so Dana, she doesn't want to be whipped again. So she jumps off the horse and tries to run. And Rufus chases her down and she tries to fight him off. And so Waylon and Jake have to come and help him get her under control because she's fighting to get away, but they manage to overpower her and they take her to the barn and they string her up by her arms and they whip her, and she's not able to disappear this time because she knows they're not trying to whip her to death. She's just being whipped for a punishment. And so afterwards, she is whipped badly. She's lost 2 teeth from being kicked in the face by Waylon. Rufus basically tasks Alice and Carrie to nurse her back to health. So while Alice is nursing Dana reveals that she will run again. She does not want to stay there. And Alice basically tells her, well, if you do, then be careful about it. You're not going nowhere right now because you're too injured to do anything. And so while Dana is recovering, we find out that the person who ratted her out for running was Lisa. Carrie, Tess, and Alice decide to take it upon themselves to ensure that Lisa don't jeopardize nobody else's plan of running. They basically jump her, and they basically ensure that she's not going to talk to nobody. And Lisa basically covers for them by telling them that she had an accident on the stairs when Waylon questions her about why she's beat up so badly. And Alice tells Dana that Lisa hates Dana and Alice. She hates Dana because she rescued Alice and saved her, and that she's jealous because Alice basically has taken her place on the plantation. And so after Dana recovers, Rufus tells her that Waylon has written to Kevin to let him know that Dana is back, and the only reason he did it was because Rufus had promised Dana that he would do it, and he did not follow through on the promise. And Waylon, of course, is upset with Rufus for promising that, but because he likes to keep his word, he goes ahead and does it. And Rufus reveals that he wanted Dana to stay on the plantation with him, and that's why he didn't send the letters. And Dana's super pissed off at him. She's like, how could you do this to me? I trusted you. And Rufus is like, I just want you to stay here. I didn't want you running away. And so Dana realizes that Rufus, in a twisted way, cares about her, and that's why he wanted her to stay on the plantation, because he cares about her in the same way that he cares about Alice, and that he wants to possess them. And he feels like he deserves to have them in his life.
I didn't know Ratchet was a language. This is in Ratchet.
So Dana, after recovering some of her strength, she returns back to working. One day, Jake forces her to work in the washroom because Tess has been sent to the field, because Tess was used to sleep with Waylon. And as long as she was sleeping with Waylon, she did not have to work in the field. But now that Waylon is basically done with her, he has given her to Jake, and Jake is having her moved from the washroom to the field because Waylon and Rufus are not on the plantation. They are away. And so Jake is in charge, and so he has Tess moved to the field so that he can keep an eye on her, and he forces Dana to work in the washroom in her place. And Dana, of course, cannot do it because she's still recovering from being whipped and her back still aches. So Alice goes out there to help her, and while they are out there washing the clothes, Kevin comes. And so when he first comes, he comes and he sees Dana and he hugs her. And Dana, of course, she winces because she's been whipped. And Kevin's like, what's wrong? And Dana's like, nothing, let's just go. And Kevin's like, no, you look hurt. Why are you hurt? And Dana basically tells him that she's been whipped. And Kevin's like, who whipped you? And Dana's like, it don't matter, let's just go. And Kevin's like, it was Waylon, wasn't it? And Dana was like, yes, it was Waylon, but let's go. And so after some convincing from Dana and Alice, Kevin decides to take Dana back north with him, but as they're leaving, they get confronted by Rufus, who has returned. Rufus tells Dana that she's not going nowhere, and he can't believe that Kevin would literally come and take her without even saying goodbye. And Kevin is not trying to hear it. Dana is really upset. She starts going off on Rufus. She basically tells Rufus, you don't own me no more. You can't do this to me. So Rufus is holding them at gunpoint and tells them that they're not going nowhere. He's aiming the gun at Kevin, and so Dana's trying to get Rufus to swing the gun at her. So she basically provokes him, and Rufus turns the gun on her. And she tells Rufus that she's leaving no matter what. And Rufus gets really upset and he aims to fire at her. And Dana, she takes cover behind the horse. And while she's taking cover behind the horse, she realizes she started disappearing and she screams for Kevin. And that's how the chapter ends. It ends with her screaming for Kevin and something falls on her. I'm not surprised by the turn that Rufus took because Dana is hoping to inspire change in him. But I'm like, you're not going to be able to inspire change in him because you're barely there. Like, you go and you're there for like a little bit and then you disappear. Meanwhile, he's there for years being influenced by those around him and the culture around him. So I'm not surprised by the turn that he took. And I'm not surprised that Kevin wasn't able to influence him because Kevin doesn't even fully understand the ramifications of what's going on. So I'm not surprised. And honestly, I'm not surprised either that Rufus ended up doing what he did to Alice. I'm not mad at Isaac for defending Alice because that's his wife, number one. But also, number two, Rufus is just a horrible person. I am a little sad that Isaac got caught though and he got his ears cut off. He didn't deserve that. This book kind of follows it's kind of like Beloved, which is kind of funny because this one came first. This one was published first and Beloved was published after it. But they kind of have like similar themings and stuff. And so it's looking 5. I'm enjoying it. And so I'm trying to have this done by tonight. I'm just excited to see how this is going to end. Today is February 28th. It's the last day of Black History Month. I finished reading Kindred last night, so let's talk about it. Where we pick up at is the chapter The Storm. So Dana and Kevin both end up making it home. When Dana fell, it was screaming for Kevin. When Rufus shot at her, Kevin basically just literally jumped on her back. When they get home, Dana's like, oh, my back. And Kevin's like, oh, I'm sorry. It was just so much going on and I heard you screaming and I realized you were disappearing, so I just kind of like fell on you. I didn't mean to hurt you. So they get home and Dana is just very happy to have Kevin home. She wants to spend time with him, so she and him go to the bedroom. And so when they wake up, they both feel very out of place, especially Kevin because he's been gone for 8 days in the present time, but in the past he was gone for 5 years. So he feels very out of place. He's having a very hard time readjusting and he's very angry and upset and kind of being a little aggressive with the appliances and stuff. And so Dana tries to talk to him to kind of just let him know that she understands, but Kevin tells her that he just wants some time to himself and time alone. And we find out that in the past, Kevin made it as far north as Maine, and he was going to buy a farm when he received the letter that Dana was back, and he came straight away to get her. And while he was waiting on her to reappear, he was helping to free slaves, and that almost cost him his life because he almost died. So for Dana, only a few hours has passed since the last time she was home. So when she gets back, she realizes that what she put on for dinner is still okay. It's still good to cook. So she makes the dinner, and Kevin comes out of his room to talk to her, and they talk, and Dana explains to him that, hey, I know what you're going through, I know what you're feeling, I know how it feels like to be back and how it feels like we're not really home and how that place is starting to feel more like home than this is. And Kevin, he starts opening up to her, but as he's opening up, Dana realizes she's disappearing again. So she screams at Kevin to hurry and get her bag for her, and he gets the bag, and right as he gets it to her, she disappears. And so she reappears back in 1815, and she's outside in the middle of a thunderstorm. She's like, okay, where's Rufus? So she gets up and starts looking around for him, and she trips over him. He's lying face down in the mud in a puddle, and he's drunk. So Dana goes to pick him up. She tries to get him to the house, but he throws up on her, so she drops him, and she runs to the house to get help, and she gets help from Nigel. So she and Nigel, they take him in the house, and Waylon comes downstairs and he sees Dana, and he's like, it's you, what are you doing here? Dana's like, Rufus almost drowned outside, so I came to get help. And Waylon's like, well, every time he gets in some trouble, you always seem to show up. And he wants to talk to her in the library. So after Dana and Nigel get Rufus situated, she goes to talk to Waylon. And Dana finds out it's been 6 years since she was last there, and Waylon is now old. He's walking around on a cane. They go back and forth about why Dana always seems to appear out of nowhere when Rufus is in trouble, and Dana tries to explain, but Waylon doesn't understand. And they go back and forth, and Dana basically lets him know, I'm not putting up with your foolishness no more. And Waylon's like, you getting beside yourself, you don't know your place, I'll have you whipped. And Dana, she gets a little scared because she realizes that even though Waylon is old and not really a threat no more, he's still a threat because he can get other people to help whip her and basically put her in her place. And so Dana goes to Rufus's room to check on him. He's not feeling well, and Nigel tells her that he has the ague. Dana doesn't really remember what the ague is until she's bitten on the ear by a mosquito. Then she realizes that the ague is malaria. She starts telling Nigel what to do to help combat malaria, but Nigel doesn't understand because they don't have an understanding of what malaria is yet. And so he's confused, and he goes to tell Waylon what Dana has asked him to do. And Waylon comes in and basically demands that Dana take care of Rufus. And Dana's like, I can't take care of Rufus. You need to get a professional. And Waylon's like, if you don't take care of him and if he dies, you also will die. Somehow you've managed to basically bring Alice back from the dead almost. So you have better healing techniques than the doctor has. And I don't know what you are. You might be a witch or something, but basically you got to heal Rufus. And if he dies, you die. So she, of course, treats him with modern medicine. She gives him aspirin and she gives him Excedrin. She gets help from Nigel, Sarah, and Alice. Sarah is old and limping now because she didn't drop the kettle on her foot. Alice is older and she's hardened because all the slaves on the plantation have turned on her because they believe that she enjoys being Rufus's preferred slave. And Alice, of course, does not enjoy it. She does not like it, but she's also, it is what it is, and she don't care what the other people have to say about her. And we learn that Alice has had 3 kids. 2 of them have died, but her youngest child, Joe, is still alive, but he's very sickly. And so Dana is, of course, like, dang it, Hagar hasn't shown up yet, so she still has to wait on Hagar to show up. And so while she's like, dang it, I still gotta wait on Hagar to show up, Rufus, he ends up getting better, but Waylon ends up getting worse. Waylon has a heart attack, and Rufus is like, Dana, you have to save him, you have to save him. Dana, of course, tries to save him to the best of her ability. She can't because she doesn't know how to treat a heart attack. So Waylon ends up dying, and Rufus blames her for it, and she has fallen out of Rufus's good graces. So she spends some time avoiding him, gets up to date on what's taking place on the plantation. Nigel has 3 kids now with Carrie, and she learns that Alice's 2 kids that died, they died because the doctor bled them to death by accident because Rufus ordered him to, because the kids were sick, and they, of course, believed that bleeding was the best way to get rid of the sickness. But unfortunately, the babies died from the bleeding. And so while Dana is avoiding Rufus and getting to know what's going on at the plantation, the new overseer, Fowler, comes to the cookhouse and snatches her out the cookhouse, and she's wondering what's going on. And she learns that Rufus has basically ordered her to work in the field because she could not save Waylon. And so he's mad at her for that, and so he forces her to work in the field. And so she gets out there and she tells Fowler she doesn't know anything about working in the field, and Fowler tells her she'll learn. And so she starts trying to do it, but she does it wrong and she gets whipped for it. And so when she's getting whipped for it, she considers killing Fowler, and Fowler basically dares her to kill him, but she doesn't take the dare, and she basically figures out what she's doing, and she works too fast. And so the other slaves in the field tell her, slow down because he's harassing you to find out how fast you'll work, and once he knows how fast you'll work, if you go slower than that, he'll whip you. So Dana takes their advice, and Fowler harasses her for the whole day, and she's working, and she basically worked herself to exhaustion, and she passes out in the field. She wakes up and she's hopeful that she has gone back home, but she has not gone back home. What ended up happening was, after she passed out, Fowler was going to whip her for passing out, but Rufus came out and saved her. And so Rufus takes her back to the house, and Dana is very pissed off at him. She doesn't want to talk to him, but Rufus forces her to talk to him because he tells her if she doesn't talk to him, he'll send her back out to the field, and she doesn't want that, so she's forced to talk to him. And Rufus tells Dana that he sent her to the field because he did it out of grief, because he needed somebody to feel what he felt. because his father had died. And basically, his way of making it up to her is by having her stay in the house and care for his mother, Margaret, who is coming back from Baltimore. Dana is extremely against the idea because she remembers how Margaret treated her when she was younger. Dana can't get out of it, so she ends up having to take care of Margaret. And when Margaret gets back, Margaret specifically requested that Dana be the one to take care of her. She's more sweet acting than she was before she left, but she's also very bossy and very demanding of Dana. And Dana is like, oh my goodness, this lady getting on my nerves. And she kind of loses her fire working under Margaret. She becomes more submissive and stuff like that, and basically more placated and quiet. And Alice calls her out on it. She's like, dang, all you had to spend was half a day in the field, and look at you now. He done really scared the spirit out of you. So she and Alice, they, they talk about it for a little bit, and then Dana decides to go to the cookhouse. And when she goes out there, it's two field slaves that are in there. They ignore Dana and refuse to talk to her. They give her dirty looks, and Dana realizes she's been ostracized from the rest of the slaves on the plantation. And so because she realizes she's been ostracized, she decides to go for a break and goes into the woods to basically clear her head. And while she's out there clearing her head, she sees a procession of slaves being led up the road, and they have like chains around their hands, and they have the little metal chokers around their neck. And so Dana's like, what's going on? So she follows them from a distance back to the plantation, and she realizes that some of the slaves are being sold to the procession. It's three field hands, and she realizes that one of the field hands is Tess. And so she calls out to Tess, trying to say goodbye to Tess, but Tess won't acknowledge her. And so while she's trying to get Tess's attention, Rufus comes out and he drags Dana back into the house. Dana basically confronts him on why he's selling the people, and Rufus tells her it's his right to sell them because they're his property. After that, Dana and Rufus, they don't talk for a few days. And while Dana was out there clearing her head and trying to figure out what was going on, Carrie ended up covering for her with Margaret by telling her that Dana was sick. And Carrie takes Dana to her cabin and they talk. And Dana expresses that she wishes that she hadn't saved Rufus. She expresses that she wishes Rufus was dead. And Carrie basically warns her against talking like that because she tells her if Rufus is dead, all of them on the plantation will be sold. And Dana expresses how she feels like she doesn't really fit in with the rest of the slaves because they're all ostracizing her and ignoring her, and they make her feel like she's not truly black. And they all treat her like she wants to be white because she is more of a black person from 1976 and not a black person from 1815. Carrie, because she can't talk, she starts wiping her face. And Dana's like, she doesn't understand what Carrie's trying to tell her. So Carrie takes her to Nigel, and Nigel basically tells her that Carrie's trying to tell her that she's black regardless of how she acts or how she feels on the inside, because outwardly she still is black and the black does not come off. And so Dana is very thankful to Carrie for uplifting her and encouraging her. So Dana avoids Rufus for 3 days after the sale, and on the 4th day Rufus comes and takes her to the library, and Dana is tired of Rufus. She is tired of him. She is sick of him. She is like, I'm just sick of you because I can't even stand to be around you. And Rufus wants her to write a whole bunch of letters to a whole bunch of people who his father owed debts to. And he explains that he sold the 3 slaves because he had to pay his father's debts off. And Dana is like, wasn't there another way to pay the debts off? And Rufus is like, if there was, I wouldn't have gone through with the sale. And he basically wants Dana to write all these letters to all the debtors to get them to, I guess, forgive the debts. And he expresses that he wants to avoid selling more slaves if possible. And so Dana, because she's not familiar with the writing style of the time, she has to familiarize herself with it. And so because she has to familiarize herself with it, she's spending more time with Rufus. And so Carrie ends up taking her place with Margaret. And so because Rufus and Dana are spending so much time together, Dana learns from Alice that Rufus is eligible for marriage. Dana wonders what that would look like for Alice if and when Rufus gets married. And so Rufus barges into the cabin where they're sitting at drunk, and he basically reveals that he sees them as 2 halves of one woman, because Alice is like the woman he prefers to sleep with, but Dana is the woman that challenges him and stimulates his mind. And so he sees them as one composite woman because they look so much alike. And so this is when we find out that Alice is pregnant. And so Dana decides to bide her time until Alice has the baby. And she keeps a journal of her time there in shorthand so that Rufus cannot read it. And she attends like this corn husking party. There's this field hand named Sam that kind of flirts with her a little bit, and Rufus doesn't like that. And Dana tells Rufus that Sam is nothing to worry about because she's married to Kevin. And Rufus basically tells Dana that any man that's interested in her, he's going to sell. She argues with him and tells him that he shouldn't be getting attached to her like that because she's already married. And Rufus is like, well, Kevin isn't here.
I didn't know Ratchet was a language. This is in Ratchet.
So they argue over him getting attached to her. A little while later, we find out that Alice has basically convinced Rufus to allow Dana to teach her children to read because she does not want her children being dumb. So Dana starts teaching Joe how to read and write, and she tells Rufus that Joe is a bright kid. So Rufus starts spending time with Joe, and Alice expresses that she wants him to free Joe, and she expresses that she knows that Rufus in return for that would want her to start liking him, and she's worried that she's starting to come around to him.
I didn't know Ratchet was a language. This is in Ratchet.
And because she's worried that she's starting to come around to him and starting to forgive him for what he's done, she decides she's going to run again. And so Dana tries to talk her out of it because she's concerned about the well-being of Joe and the baby that's on the way. And Alice convinces her to get her some laudanum to keep the babies quiet when she does run. So she decides to run when she has her baby, and Dana basically tells her, okay, I'll help you, but I don't think it's a good idea. And so Dana is allowed to start teaching the other kids on the plantation how to read and write, and Rufus's neighbors are against it because they feel like if his slaves start learning how to read and write, they're going to rebel against him. But Rufus basically backs Dana and allows her to continue educating them. And Dana is content with biding her time, waiting on the baby to be born until Sam approaches her and asks her to teach his brother and sister how to read. Dana at first is like kind of concerned about why Sam is talking to her because she's asked Sarah to talk to Sam about him flirting with her, and Sam tells her that he's not interested in her like that really, but it's a shame that she's spoken for. And a few days after he gets his request, Sam and his brother and sister, they end up being sold. Rufus saw Sam talking to Dana and he thought Sam was flirting with Dana and he didn't like that. Sam's other sister is very upset with Dana and curses her. Dana begged Rufus not to go through with the sale, but Rufus slaps her. And so Dana, she's fed up with Rufus because he has broken the one agreement they had, which was for him to never put his hands on her and treat her like she was everybody else and basically show her basic respect. If she goes upstairs and she gets the knife and she basically cuts herself to try and bleed herself to death and force herself to go home. And that's how the storm ends. And so after the storm, we get into the rope. Dana succeeds in her attempt to get home. Kevin patches her up and saves her with the help of a doctor friend. He tells her that she didn't cut any main artery. She basically was able to return home because she believed she was dying. Dana is thankful that she didn't do any real harm, but Kevin tells her that the doctor friend suggests that she see a psychiatrist because if something like this happens again, she'll be forced to go into a psychiatric ward against her will, and she doesn't want that. And so Kevin and Dana talk about what went on while she was gone, and Kevin does not like that Rufus' attitude is changing towards Dana, and he alludes to Dana that she might end up having to kill him, but Dana is hoping it doesn't have to come down to that. And so they get 15 days together in 1976. They are still having trouble adjusting to being back home, and Kevin confronts Dana about whether Rufus has assaulted her, and Dana tells him no, he hasn't, but his attitude towards me is beginning to feel like he's falling in love with me. And Dana expresses to Kevin like her troubles and her worries. She expresses that the reason she's not willing to kill Rufus is because she wants to keep the other slaves from being separated and sold and stuff like that, and that she feels like she's not able to survive the way that they had to survive, and that she's not cut out for what they have to go through. And Kevin only half understands what she's talking about. He's trying to encourage her, but he's only half getting it. And so Dana's thankful that he is at least making an attempt to understand. He's basically trying to let her know that it's been 15 days, you know, it's possible you might not have to go back anymore. And Dana, of course, is not believing it. She's still scared to go anywhere, and of course she ends up being right, because on the 4th of July, while they're making plans to go out and Kevin wants her to go out with him, she disappears. And so when she gets back, she finds that Rufus is upset about something. He grabs her by the hand and leads her to the barn, and when she gets there, she sees Alice hanging and she's died. And Dana is very upset about it. She grieves Alice. She's like, what happened? And Rufus explains to her that Alice ran with the kids, but she was caught. And she finds out from Sarah that Rufus sold Joe and the other baby. The other baby was born. The baby is named Hagar, and so Dana's happy because Hagar is finally born. So she realizes that she has succeeded in getting Hagar to be born, and so she can finally rest easy a little bit. Joe and Hagar were sold by Rufus as punishment, and so Dana, she gets upset with Rufus for selling his own kids, and so she goes to confront him. He has a gun in his hand, acting like he's gonna kill himself, but Dana basically tells him put it down, and he puts it down. And Rufus explains to Dana that he didn't actually sell Joe and Hagar. He just gave them to his aunt in Baltimore to teach Alice a lesson about trying to run. But she, of course, was very distraught about it, and so she went and hung herself. And Dana is disgusted with his actions. She's disgusted with Rufus, so she tells him that the only way he can make this right is by granting Joe and Hagar their freedom. And Rufus agrees to do it. So Alice has her funeral, and after the funeral, Rufus takes Dana up to the courthouse and has certificates of freedom written up for Joe and Hagar. And he goes to Baltimore to get the kids, but he won't let Dana go with him because he feels like Dana is going to try to run again. And so when he gets back with the kids, Dana learns that she's only been gone this time for 3 months. And so nothing has really changed except for Alice dying. And so Dana, while she's there, she's working on getting Rufus to free the others. But Rufus explains to her that that's crazy for him to do because if he frees everyone, he's not going to make any money. And he reveals that he has nightmares about Dana leaving him to die. And he stopped having those nightmares when he got Alice, but now that Alice is dead, the nightmares have returned, and he's been having the nightmares since the night of the fire. And so Dana and Rufus, they talk about how she's like out of place on there because she doesn't behave like the other slaves. And Rufus explains how it's that out of placeness that attracts him to her. But Dana explains that she can't trust Rufus because of how he's treated her and how he's treated everybody else. And Rufus explains that he also can't trust Dana because she's tried to run before and he's scared of her leaving him. And so Rufus basically is like explaining to Dana that he wants her to stay, and Dana realizes that he wants her to take Alice's place because Alice is gone. And so Dana refuses to take Alice's place, and she refuses to stay and raise his kids, and Rufus does not like that, so he tries to force her to stay. But Dana threatens to cause herself to disappear again if he tries to force her to stay. And so they argue, and he chases her to the attic. And when they get up to the attic, Dana is fearful of Rufus because she's afraid that Rufus is going to try to force himself on her because he feels the same way towards her that he felt towards Alice, and he did that to Alice. And so Rufus, of course, is explaining that he is falling for Dana and he wants Dana to stay, but Dana does not like that, so she grabs a knife and she stabs him to death. And Nigel comes in and sees. While Nigel is freaking out about what to do, Dana starts disappearing, but Rufus has a grip on her arm. And so when she disappears and she starts reappearing in her home, she realizes that her arm is stuck in the wall because Rufus is holding onto her arm and has died holding onto her arm. And so to get herself free, she basically has to rip her arm off. So she rips her arm off and she's in a lot of pain, and that's when we pick up from where we were at in the prologue, where she's basically in the hospital and her arm is gone. That's how the rope ends, and then we get to the epilogue. And so in the epilogue, Dana, her arm is gone, and so she and Kevin wait till her arm is healed up, and they go to Maryland to basically find out what's happened and to find Rufus's grave. They cannot find Rufus's grave. The Wayland plantation is gone, and they learn that it's been burned down. And so Dana finds out that most of the slaves were sold after Rufus's death, but only Carrie, Nigel, Joe, and Hagar are not listed as being sold. And so Dana suspects that Nigel burned the plantation down, rescued Margaret, and that Margaret took those four with her to live in Baltimore. And that's where Hagar ended up growing up and beginning the record of the family. And there's no record of what happened to everybody else after the sale, and Kevin basically tells Dana that she just has to accept that she's not going to know what happens and that they just have to start living their lives again now that they're free. And Dana, of course, agrees with him, but we find out that Dana did not tell him everything that led up to her stabbing Rufus. She only gave him like a basic overview, and Kevin just accepted the overview. He didn't really press for any details, and Dana is thankful for that. And so the book ends with them kind of being hopeful that they can start their lives anew in the present with the knowledge of what they know now and basically like move forward. So having finished reading Kindred, I really enjoyed this book. I give it a 5. It was sad and it was heavy, but it was so good that I couldn't give it anything less than a 5. It had the same effect on me that Beloved had. Reading those two books together, just they go very well together because they talk about similar things. It was just so interesting to read. I really enjoyed Dana in the book. Kevin kind of was irking my nerves a little bit because he would do things and I would be like, well, why would you do that, Kevin? Why would you do that? Why would you put Dana in a situation? You have to keep in mind, Kevin don't have the same worldview that Dana has. His reaction to what's going on is going to be different from hers. And Rufus, Rufus was irritating. But it was just really interesting to see. It was really interesting to read, to get to see her like being responsible for ensuring that she is born. It was a good and interesting read. It was very informative. I really enjoyed it. I gave it a 5 stars. So having read the book, I am now going to go ahead and watch the television adaptation.
Kindred was adapted into a 2022 television show on FX and Hulu. The rights to adapt Kindred were first acquired in 2008 by executive producer Courtney Lee Mitchell. Showrunner Brandon Jacobs Jenkins first became interested in adapting the story for the screen in 2010. After meeting with Darren Aronofsky and Ari Handel of Protozoa Pictures, the team met with Lee Mitchell in 2016 and convinced her to let them adapt the story. Kindred spent 4 years in development until it was picked up by FX in 2020 and filmed from April to September 2022. Kindred stars Mallory Johnson, Micah Stock, Ryan Quanten, Gail Rankin, and David Alexander Kaplan, and released on December 13th, 2022.
My preconceived notions on this adaptation, like I said, I didn't even know he was getting adaptation until about like a week before it was supposed to drop. I was like, when was this? So my thoughts on it before I watch it, my thoughts on it start with that, because from my understanding and for what I heard about this adaptation, first I've heard this adaptation is really bad. It's not a good adaptation of the story. They took a lot of creative liberties with the story to the point that the book storyline is not recognizable in the story. And I've heard that the storyline that they tried to work with didn't really work. Even just on its own, it's not good. That's what I've heard about it. From my understanding and from what I understand, it was just supposed to be marketed as a one series adaptation of the book, but apparently it was supposed to have more seasons, but it's been canceled. Kindred, the series, has been canceled after that one season, so apparently it was supposed to have more than one season. I was like, I thought this was just gonna be a little one season adaptation of the book, but so apparently like they have some setup in there for like multiple seasons, and it has a very open ending. So, and this is all stuff that I've just heard about it. I haven't seen it yet. So it might turn out the same way that Beloved did, where I'm like, oh, I've heard it is really bad, but then it's really not that bad. It's just fan reaction was terrible to it because fan reaction didn't like it. So I'm going to wait and see. It's 8 episodes long, so I'm going to see how this goes, and hopefully it's not too bad. But we'll see.
I will be rating this on 2 separate scales. The first is how does it do as an adaptation of the source material, and the second is how does it do as its own story. The reason I'm doing it like this is because sometimes an adaptation of a work can be straight up trash, but can be amazing in its own right as a story. Also, realistically, there will be things cut from an adaptation for any reason, so I look at how well did the film do at working around what was cut. And I also look at what was added, because sometimes things that were added bring fresh and new flavor to a story, or offer additional insights, and sometimes even improves on the events of the book. Therefore, I'm looking at how well was the adaptation done, how enjoyable is the work in its own right, and what was added to enhance the story.
So I just watched the first episode of Kindred. Right now, the adaptation score is on life support. It's at a 2. If you want to watch this because you want to see a straight adaptation of the book, don't watch this show, because it's not for you, okay? This show said, forget the book. We're gonna take some things from the book and we're gonna do our own thing. That's what this show has done. So, as a show, right now the score is at a 4. I am interested in what they're going to do since they've changed so much stuff around. The present is no longer 1976, now the present is 2016. They've added a storyline about Dana's mom being trapped in 1815, and I'm kind of excited to see how that plays out, because in the book Dana kind of has to navigate 1815 by herself, except for that one time when Kevin latches on her, and even then she still kind of have to navigate it by herself. Her mom there, maybe her mom will be able to possibly help if they have a decent relationship. And I'm also excited because Dana's mom, Olivia, says that she was transported to 1815 when she was 26, just like Dana was transported when she was 26, so I'm excited to see how that's going to play out. And I'm wondering if maybe it's like a storyline where the women in the family, they get transported back to help Rufus until one of them figures it out and actually saves him. Because at the beginning, we see like Dana's mom over Rufus as a baby the first time Dana got transported, but she didn't help Rufus. She kind of just left him laying on his face, and Dana's the one who had to flip him back over. And I'm like, why would you leave the baby on his face? I'm excited to see how that storyline plays out. They also, instead of having Kevin and Dana be married like in the book, they don't even know each other in the show. Like, we see them meet for the first time in the show, so they're not even married. They're not even together. I guess we're going to explore their relationship as the show goes. So I'm curious to see how they're going to handle this. And also, they got a nosy neighbor storyline, and I feel like I'm going to hate that storyline because why? But overall, I'm excited to see how this show goes because the adaptation is on the floor. The adaptation is what adaptation? This is basically its own thing at this point. But I'm excited to see how they do. So episode 1 is titled Dana. So, of course, it's focusing on Dana. It opens with her on the floor after being whipped. And so that's one thing I will say is that this season, it did kind of follow the structure of the book a little bit in that it started with its ending, just like the book started with the ending and then went back to the beginning. It opens with Dana being whipped and she's left Kevin behind in the past. And so it's a bunch of stuff going on. She texts somebody, let them know that she's back. And then the police are at her door trying to come in. So yeah, it was a lot going on. They updated the present to 2016 instead of 1976. And at first I was like, why did we do this? Why didn't we just leave it in 1976? I don't know if I like that or not. Because I'm like, I can see why they did it for this particular adaptation, but I kind of do wish they had left it in 1976. Whatever, the main point is still there. She going from the present to the past. This Dana is not married to Kevin, and she is not from LA. I don't remember if she was from LA in the book, but she's not from LA in the show. She moved to LA. And so basically she sold the brownstone that her grandmother left to her. And so her aunt and uncle are like, her aunt and uncle see her as like the, this young 26-year-old girl who don't know what she's doing with her life, and they're estranged from her. So they're not really like in her life. They're all the family that she has left because her parents died in a car crash. Her grandmother's dead. So they're all the family she has left. And her career aspiration has been changed from wanting to be a novelist to wanting to be a TV writer. And so, like I said, she and Kevin, they don't know each other. They meet for the first time in the first episode. And at first, when I seen them not knowing each other, I was like, why did y'all not make them married? Like, the whole point was that they are in an interracial relationship and they keep getting pulled back to the past where it's not allowed for them to do that. But I will say this. Even though I liked that they were married in the book and it worked well for the book, I like that they are not married in the show and that they're actually getting to know each other because we actually get to see their relationship like come together. Like, they took all of the little like pieces in the book where Dana talks about how she met Kevin and how they get together. We actually get to see them get together in the story. Kevin is no longer a writer either. He's been changed to a musician. And instead of having 3 books that are like doing well enough to get him paid, but not really like live comfortably, he now works as a waiter. And he's been aged down a little bit. Now their age gap is no longer 12 years. It's now 8 years. Dana's 26 and Kevin is 34. And so they meet at the restaurant, and Dana, she of course doesn't take a ride home with her aunt and uncle because they just had an argument about her just basically moving across the country with no plan. So Kevin offers to take her home, and that's how they get to know each other, and that's how Kevin gets to her house and they start getting to know each other intimately. And so the first time Dana gets called back to the past is changed. Instead of it being at the river, it is now when he's a baby. She gets called back because there's a lady standing over his crib. And so when Dana goes over there, the baby's on its face. And so Dana, of course, she flips Rufus over and she hears people talking in the hallway. So she goes out there. She sees this white woman and she sees this black woman talking. And so, of course, she announces herself, and the black woman rushes at her and scares her. And that's how Dana gets back to the present. And we find out that the black woman is Dana's mother. But Dana thinks she's dreaming. So she thinks she just dreamed of her mother being there because she is under the impression that her mom is dead. And so there was this shot that they kept using in like the first episode. It was like these wide angle shots, and I loved it. It looked so good. Her aunt comes over to talk things out because they didn't want to leave things how they were. And they get in another argument because her aunt is like, oh, you sold my mother's house and you didn't even say nothing. Like, you're just moving strangely. And so the aunt thinks that Dana is kind of mentally unstable like her mother was, because her mother was mentally unstable before she disappeared. And like they never found her body in the car crash, so it's just presumed that she died. And so Kevin and Dana, of course, they're getting to know each other. They go on their first date and they reveal that their parents are dead. You know, they still kind of have the same backstory from the book. And so then the second time that Dana gets called back is, of course, for the river. I loved it because it's like it's slowly filtered in and it just looks so gorgeous. I was like, this is beautiful. But Kevin does not see her disappear like he did in the book. So when she comes back, he's confused on where she went. And so they added these storylines. They added 2 storylines. First storyline is the storyline with her mom, who got called back into the past before Dana. And so, of course, I was theorizing that it was generational. And then the second storyline is the storyline with these nosy neighbors. These nosy neighbors who live next door, who keep coming over because they think something is going on in Dana's house. And they're like, oh, this is a quiet neighborhood with kids. Them nosy neighbors got on my nerves, but I couldn't fault them because they suspected Dana was being abused. So that's why they were being so nosy, because they're like, oh, we suspect she's being abused and we suspect drugs are involved, apparently. And so, of course, Dana saves Rufus. It plays out how it does in the book, and she comes back. And then her and Kevin talk some more, and then she gets called back again for the fire. And this time, Kevin does see her disappear, but he doesn't go with her. So she saves Rufus, and she makes her way out to Alice's, like it happens in the book. And we find out that Alice's mother name is Hagar. And I was like, why did we make this change? I don't know how I felt about that. Because in the book, Alice names her daughter Hagar because it's supposed to be a symbol of Hagar from the Bible, which, if you don't know, Bible lesson. Hagar was Abraham's wife-approved side chick. And what I mean by wife-approved is that Sarah approved Abraham to sleep with her because she determined that she could not have kids because she was old, but God told her she was going to have a child. But because she was old, she was like, oh, I'm not going to have a child. Obviously, God was wrong, which he wasn't, because she ended up having a baby at 90 years old. But I say wife approved because it was a wife approved side chick, but it was not a God approved side chick, because God doesn't approve side chicks. And he doesn't approve side men either. But it was a wife-approved side chick because Sarah okayed it. And so Hagar was her servant. And so she approved Abraham to sleep with her. And they had a child named Ishmael. And then Sarah, of course, when Abraham had the child with Hagar, she, of course, all of a sudden becomes jealous because, oh, my servant has a baby with my husband, but I don't. I'm not going to rant about Sarah because I don't have time to rant about her. So, of course, she grew jealous. And so because she grew jealous, she was like, oh, it's me or her. And so, of course, Abraham, he's going to choose his wife over Hagar because Hagar was just a vessel to have a baby. So he sends Hagar and Ishmael away. And Hagar, of course, is distraught because she's like, oh my gosh, me and my son, we're not going to have anybody to provide for us. But God is like, I'm going to take care of y'all too. So Hagar was named Hagar because it was a symbol of Hagar from the Bible. Had they continued the series in the season 2, Alice probably would have had the girl and named the girl after her mother. And so I don't know how I feel about that change, but it's okay. And so Dana comes back after encountering Hagar and, you know, the patroller. She comes back and she has this black eye for a few episodes after this because she got beat up by the patroller. So she comes back. Kevin saw her disappear this time. So he's like, oh my gosh, I saw you disappear. What's going on with you? And they talk. They get into it a little bit because Kevin called her a princess. And Dana doesn't want to be called a princess because she feels like that's demeaning. And we learned that Dana's mom, Olivia, has been in the past. For her, time has been 11 years. It's been 11 years since she's been there. But it's been longer since she disappeared. So I watched the second episode of Kindred last night, and my thoughts on it are that Dana is going to be the one that works my nerves in this show. The way she's behaving last night on that episode, it's like everything she did in the book was given to Kevin. It was her that was the one that was pushing for them to act the part in the past, but then like in the show, it's like it's still her who makes a suggestion, but then she doesn't behave like they're supposed to behave. Like she's speaking up, she's speaking out of turn when she's not supposed to be, and then it's her that's like, she's the one that suggests that she stay in Kevin's room, as opposed to the book where it was Kevin who suggested that she be in his room. It's like all of the decisions she made in the book are given to Kevin, and all of the decisions Kevin made in the book are given to Dana. And I'm like, why did y'all flip-flop their places if they're not gonna act like how they're supposed to act? But my biggest gripe with this episode is that the episode is named Sabina. Sabina is a character that was created specifically for the show. She is an enslaved woman who has an issue with her feet, which it affects her walking. And so the episode is named after her, but she's only in 2 scenes. We don't find nothing out about Sabina. She's there for like 2 seconds, and then just like that, she's gone because she's been traded away
to take care of Rufus's medical bills from when he fell and broke his leg. And so I'm like, why did we name this episode Sabina? Why is Sabina such an important character to have the episode named after her if she's barely in it? We spent more time with Dana and her foolishness and her not getting with the program than we did with Sabina. But as a show, like, with all the book changes aside, as a show, I feel like I'm going to enjoy this.
And so episode 2 is named Sabina. It's about this woman who's a slave who's named Sabina, but Sabina only appeared in 2 episodes. Well, yeah, she only appeared in 2 episodes, and she only appeared in 2 scenes in the episode named after her. I'm like, why is it named after Sabina if she's barely in it? We don't even get her story. So Dana, of course, she starts strategizing. The nosy neighbors, they come over looking for their cat because Dana let the cat in the house in the first episode, but she was holding it when she disappeared. So she disappeared with the cat. So the nosy neighbors are looking for their cat. And that was that cat. Of course, the cat's in the past. You know, they're questioning Kevin on the disappearance of the cat. Kevin doesn't know anything because he doesn't know where the cat is. And the nosy neighbors are basically trying to catch him in a lie. And they were getting on my nerves. Kevin and Dana, they talk some more about it. Kevin tries to get Dana to leave the house because they're convinced that it's the house that's causing her to disappear. But while he's trying to get her out the house, they disappear again. And this time, when they disappear, it's because Rufus done fell out of a tree and broke his leg. And so Dana pissed me off in this episode because Dana, when they get back there, of course, she suggests that she and Kevin act the roles of being in the past, but the whole time she's there, she never acts the role. She's still acting like a 2016 girl in 1815. It's like they gave all of her decisions to Kevin and all of Kevin's decisions to her. So she's, of course, acting like a 2016 girl in 1815 and getting herself into all these situations. And Kevin is completely lost on what to do because he don't know what to do at all. Kevin and Dana in the show were a lot slower to catch on to what to do than Kevin and Dana in the book were. But I will say this, Kevin and Dana had a lot less to work with in the show than Kevin and Dana in the book did. Dana didn't even know her family history in the show. She didn't learn her family history until the finale. And so I'm like, well, of course you were slower to catch on. You don't even know how important it is. You thinking Carrie your ancestor, and the whole time it's Alice. But yeah, they were a lot slower to catch on what to do in the show than they were in the book. And even if they were slower to catch on, come on now, Dana, you of all people should know it's certain things you should not be doing. They get Rufus squared away, but Tom can't afford Rufus's medical bills, so he sells Sabina to the doctor as like compensation for his services, and that's basically the last we see of her is her leaving the house. And I'm like, so why did we name this episode after her if we weren't gonna see her? There's this added plot in the past about Tom trying to buy his neighbor's land because he's trying to expand, and so his neighbor is his former brother-in-law. He is the husband of the sister of his first wife, Hannah. So Hannah gets a little bit more expansion on her character in the show, which I did like because we get to learn a little bit more about her. And Margaret is kind of like living in Hannah's shadow. She doesn't really match up to Hannah, and Hannah is more like beloved and preferred in the house than Margaret is. And so of course they spin up the tale that Kevin was robbed and the only thing he has left is Dana. But in the show, Tom is like, oh, we gonna get your stuff back. So I'm like, y'all might get caught up in y'all lie. And Kevin, he's doing a slightly better job at playing along than Dana is, but barely, because Dana barely playing along herself. She not doing a good job, so Kevin barely doing a good job. And it's just like, y'all are not doing a good job at this.
So I just watched episode 3 and 4 of Kindred. I'm really liking this series, but adaptation wise, the score is definitely looking 2.5. It seems like they definitely took like maybe like the first half of the book, what was supposed to be, I guess, this season, and the rest of the book was probably supposed to be dealt with later on in the series, but unfortunately got canceled. What I will say is I have been enjoying what they did so far. I do like it. So the on its own score is very high, but the adaptation score is looking like a 2.5 right now. The subplot with the mom, I was right. It is generational. Like the women in the family for generations have been going back, and it seems like Dana is the one to finally figure out what's going on. But it's weird because the link to Rufus is through Dana's father. Olivia tells Dana that her father had ancestors in Maryland, and so Dana's mom married into the family. So I'm like, why is Dana's mom the one going back in time when she's married into the family? This also happened to the grandma. It's like the grandma is the aunt's mom. The aunt says that Dana's father is her brother. I don't know. The family tree has me a little confused because I'm like, how are we all related here? I am enjoying that storyline. I am enjoying that I was right about it. The nosy neighbors and the aunt and uncle, their little subplots, they're getting on my nerves, but I can't blame them for how they're reacting to the situation because they don't know nothing. But it is annoying because it's like the neighbors, they think Dana's being abused by Kevin. So
they're trying to rescue Dana out of what they believe is an abusive situation. So I can't blame them for that. The uncle is the one really being irksome because Uncle Alan is the one who kept Aunt Denise away from the family because he didn't want her dealing with the craziness of her family. He's the reason that Dana is estranged from them in the first place. And it's also his fault that Denise now believes that Dana is crazy. Of course, she believed that something was off with Dana's mom and the grandma. Basically, they believe Dana is crazy and they're trying to have her committed. It's a lot going on. And the family tree is confusing, but I can't blame them for how they're reacting to the situation because they don't know anything. They don't know what's going on. There's one more little funny thing. So Dana, she goes to Kevin's house to get supplies, and while Kevin is supposed to be getting a gun, his sister comes in. And of course, he's not going to come out with a gun, so he comes out with a book. And what book do you think he came out with? He came out with Beloved. He came out with Beloved, and I was like, hey, Beloved. I said that Beloved and Kindred go really well together, and I like that the people behind the show acknowledge that. I love that they acknowledge that. That made me laugh a little bit. So yeah, right now, adaptation-wise, the score is looking very 2.5 out of 5, because it's like they kept just enough from the book to make it be in line with the book storyline, but they've done a lot of changes, and they've done a lot of new stuff. And I actually kind of like the new stuff. Show-wise, it's looking very 4.5 out of 5. Because I'm really enjoying the show. I'm really enjoying it. And so episode 3 is titled Furniture. Dana apparently took the patroller back to the present, but she doesn't know what happened to him. But after watching the finale, I suspect that if he did make the trip, he probably appeared in Maryland, as opposed to appearing in LA. And so we learned that Olivia was first called back because of a massacre. And so she had to save someone. I don't know. I was confused on the family tree because it's like Olivia married Dana's father. Dana is the descendant of the Whalens, and Denise is his sister. The confusion comes with the grandma because the grandma is like who was apparently also going through this, but the grandma is the mother of Dana's father and Aunt Denise. And Olivia married Dana's father. So the confusion was, if they happened to the grandma, why was Olivia the one called back when she's not blood related to them? She's married in. I was confused, but it took a minute to work out, at least the family tree. And so, of course, Tom is trying to buy the property from his brother-in-law. And so, of course, Hannah's coming up a lot. Margaret feels in her shadow. And the brother-in-law prefers the company of men. And so he comes on to Kevin. And Kevin, of course, is uncomfortable with it. And the brother-in-law's daughter, her name is Temperance, but she's anything but temperate. She go in there messing with Rufus, making fun of him for still playing with his slaves. And she tries to insult Dana and tells Dana, oh, you're a useless slave. Come over here so I can slap your face. And Dana's like, well, if you slap me, can I slap you back? And Temperance throws a fit. And, of course, they want Kevin to punish Dana because Dana is masquerading as his slave, but Kevin refuses to do so because they spin up the story that Dana is pregnant. It just is a hot mess. And so Tom is like, well, what did you do to get him to leave like that? And Kevin admits that the brother-in-law came on to him. And so Tom uses that to his advantage to basically get the brother-in-law to sell his land to him. And so Dana confronts Olivia about what happened the first time that she got called back. And Olivia's like, I don't know what you're talking about. Because at this point in the show, I was suspecting that it was Olivia who had flipped Rufus over on his face. And I'm like, why are you lying? Because we saw you. But they confront each other. And it's like, I was really enjoying the storyline with Olivia. It was nice to have her there kind of like as a guiding figure to Dana about how to handle being in the past. But Dana wasn't listening. It was like, Dana, listen to your mom. She's been here. I understood because Dana didn't have Olivia in her life because Olivia disappeared when she was a baby. They work out that Dana keeps getting called back by Rufus, and Olivia works out on her own that Dana gets sent back by being scared. And so she decides to test it. So when Dana comes to see her, she tells Kevin, just remember when y'all get back, give her a lot of water. But Kevin doesn't understand. So Olivia pretends to poison Dana. And so when she tells Dana, I poisoned you, Dana starts freaking out, and that gets them sent back. And that's how the episode ends. We get to episode 4. It's titled The Waiter from 2 Nights Ago. Kevin and Dana are back in LA. The nosy neighbors, they are doing too much. Entirely too much. But I understand because they think Dana's being abused by Kevin. So they're trying to rescue her. But they're just doing too much because y'all don't have enough information. And so this episode focuses on like their family backstories. And so Kevin takes Dana over to his house to get supplies. And while they're over there, of course, his sister comes home. And his sister is not like how she was in the book. She doesn't come across as very racist towards Dana. It's probably because they changed her from being married to just having a boyfriend. I don't know why everybody all of a sudden was not married anymore. But of course, his sister, her name is Penny. She's worried about Kevin. And of course, Dana, she questions if Kevin is a squatter, and he gets offended by that. So I'm like, so you're offended by the princess, he's offended by squatter. Dana starts planning for what happens the next time they go back, and Kevin lets her know, I don't want to go back. And Dana is, she's kind of like shocked by that a little bit. She just assumed that they would be going back together because she's like, oh, Kevin understands, so I can take him back with me to help. But Kevin's like, I don't want to go through that. Dana's Uncle Alan comes over. Uncle Alan got on my nerves because he was just very domineering and just super annoying, and he's an ex-police officer. So of course he's trying to protect Dana, and he's trying to keep Kevin away from Dana because he thinks that Dana is losing her mind. And so we find out that he's the reason that Denise is estranged from the rest of the family, because he convinced her to stay away from the family even after her mom died. And he's the reason that they didn't go back for Dana, because he was trying to do it to keep Denise safe. But I'm like, that's still not an excuse. I get that you didn't want your wife being hurt, but you hurt other people who had nothing to do with the situation. Dana is convinced by her aunt and uncle to go see her aunt at the hospital and talk to her. So when she gets there, she's talking to her aunt, and she tells her aunt what's going on, but Aunt Denise does not believe her. She tries to pretend like she does, but she doesn't. What she's really trying to do is get Dana committed to the hospital, into the psych ward. And so Dana, she gets a call from Kevin because Kevin encounters Uncle Alan, and Uncle Alan basically tells Kevin, stay away from her. We finally trying to get her some help, and here you come with your foolishness. And so Kevin warns Dana that something is wrong, and so Dana confronts Denise about whether she believes her or not. Denise is like, oh, well, I believe that you believe that this is happening, but this was also something that was wrong with your mom and your grandma, and I didn't believe them, and I don't want you to go through the same thing. And so Dana realizes that Denise does not believe her, so she runs away. She finds Kevin, and they're trying to escape the hospital, and while they're escaping, Dana starts disappearing, and so she disappears before Denise's eyes. And I'm like, so I guess you believe her now, Denise, huh? Okay, so today is March 29th. So I just finished watching Kindred. I finished out the last 4 episodes, and I am pissed that this show was canceled because I really enjoyed it. As an adaptation, I give it a 2.5 because from what they were able to do, they stuck relatively close to the book storyline, but they added in a lot of new material that helped flesh out the story. Like the little backstory pieces we would get before continuing the story in the book, they actually use those pieces to flesh out the beginning of the storyline. So I actually really like that. I really, really loved the storyline with Dana's mom, Olivia. I'm still confused a little bit on the family line, but basically Olivia did marry into the family. The grandma is Dana's father's mother. So I'm a little confused on why Olivia was sent back when she's not blood related to the Waylands. But I feel like we would have got answers on that in season 2 had they not canceled it. So I am pissed that they canceled this show because it was a good show. Like, as an adaptation, I give it a 2.5, but as a show, I give it a 5 because it was really good, and I really liked the changes and the additions that they made to the story because it helped the story. It enhanced it, and I'm pissed with where it ended because I knew going into this it was gonna be an open ending, but I didn't think it was gonna be that open. Like, it literally stopped right in the middle of the storyline. I feel like they had plotted this out for 2 seasons, and the second season would have covered the rest of the storyline and would have given us the rest of what they had planned. And I'm mad because we could have at least got that second season before y'all canceled it. Y'all could have at least finished out the show. I finished watching it. It was really good. I really enjoyed it. Dana was irking my nerves. She made a lot more poor decisions than Book Dana did, but I will say that Book Dana was more informed going back in time to 1815 than Show Dana was. Book Dana at least had the knowledge of the family history. Show Dana didn't even have that. And Book Dana also was more proactive in learning more about the time period she was in, whereas Show Dana was too busy trying to be a 2016 girl in 1815. But it was her idea to adapt to the time period they were in, but she was not adapting. And them darn nosy neighbors got on my nerves. I'm just pissed that they canceled this show because we deserved to have it finished out at the very least. Like, I'm mad because I was really enjoying it. The last episode really showed like where we were going, what direction we were heading in for the next season, and I'm mad that we ain't getting it. especially because Olivia came back in the season finale. And when she came back, I was like, where did she go? But it makes sense. She reappeared in New York, which is where she disappeared from. And I'm mad that that's how it ended. It ended with Olivia reappearing in New York. We should have got what we deserved with this show. And we was getting it, but they canceled it, and I'm mad. I am very pissed off about this. So episode 5 is titled Winnie. Winnie is a slave that is being forced to sleep with Tom. And so Dana gets called back because Rufus apparently snuck some alcohol out of the kitchen and he got alcohol poisoning. And so Dana suspects that Carrie and Rufus get together because they were together when he got poisoned. She is like, we got to keep them together. And so Dana goes to see Olivia. Olivia reveals to Dana that she's not planning on returning to 2016 because that's not the year that she left. She left in 1992. And so she's like, that's a whole different world from when I disappeared. And so she plans on staying in the past to raise Alice. Kevin secures himself a job as tutoring Rufus in music. And Dana talks with Sarah, and Sarah reveals that she actually poisoned the cake that Rufus had snuck off with the alcohol. So Dana realizes that Rufus did not get alcohol poisoning. He was poisoned by the cake that Sarah poisoned. And so everyone, of course, eats the cake, and all of the white people get poisoned, except for Kevin because he didn't eat it. But he didn't know about the poison either. So because of that, Carrie and Sarah are at risk of being sold as punishment. Dana, because she does not want Carrie to be separated from Rufus, she comes up with this plan to convince Winnie that Tom believes that Winnie is the one who poisoned them, and so he's going to sell her as punishment. And so she convinces Winnie to run to basically save Sarah and Carrie. As she's helping Winnie get away, Luke spots them in the woods, but he doesn't say anything. So Dana gets to Olivia, and Dana is dumb because she reveals to Winnie that she is not a slave to get Winnie to trust her. And I'm like, why would you reveal that? And so episode 6 is titled Celeste. Celeste is another slave that is pregnant. Her and Luke have kind of been getting together. So she's pregnant, and it's assumed that the baby is Luke's. And so the episode opens with Kevin and Dana. They're listening to like this phone that Kevin brings back from 2016, and it's because Dana's been staying in his room. And I'm like, so what happens when the phone dies? Because there's no electricity for y'all to be using like that in 1815. And so Margaret, of course, is planning on getting Rufus married, so she invites this girl over named Philippa with her father, and that's her plan. And so because Winnie has run off, and because Celeste is pregnant, Margaret now takes Carrie as her new serving girl in the house. And so she forces Carrie to wear this white dress. And so when Sarah sees her in the white dress, she's like, Carrie, take off that dress. And it made me laugh because it made me think of Stephen King's Carrie, where the mom is like, Carrie, take off that dress and we'll burn it and beg for forgiveness. And the mom in Carrie is also named Margaret. And I was like, I don't know if this is a reference, but it was hilarious to me. And so because Dana has convinced Winnie to run away, Tom, of course, is upset because Winnie was his girl that he was sleeping with. Because she's gone and nobody is telling where she went, he decides to starve everybody until he gets some information on where she's going. And so Dana, of course, she talks to Luke to basically find out if Luke is going to rat her out, and Luke is not going to rat her out. She brings him some food that she snuck from 2016, and she basically tells Luke, oh, look, we gonna get through this together. And I'm like, Dana, you talking about we gonna get through this, but we end this because of you. It's because of you that we are being starved in the first place. And Dana, she's complaining about having to be careful. Oh, I'm tired of having to be careful. I'm a human. And I'm like, girl, you are in 1815. You complain about being careful, but you are in a time where literally anything that you do can get you punished, sold, or killed. You have to be careful, Dana. Survival. You have no survival skills. You have no survival skills like Book Dana had. Book Dana at least was committed to trying to survive. You not committed. You trying to be human. Book Dana trying to survive. So, of course, because Celeste has not been eating, she goes into labor early. She and the baby both die. And when Luke is holding the baby, he realizes that the baby is not his because the baby has a fine grade of hair. And it's Tom's baby. And so Luke is upset about that. And Margaret, of course, because she feels unloved by Tom, she starts coming on to Kevin. Kevin rejects her. She's heartbroken by it. And Luke, of course, he's upset that the baby is not his and that Celeste is also dead. Luke and Tom, they grew up together, but Luke feels like he's been done wrong by Tom because Tom promised him that one day he would be free and that he would have his own land, but Tom has not gone through with that promise. And so Luke is basically starting to lose faith in Tom. I don't know why he had faith in him to begin with. And so Margaret discovers that Dana and Kevin have been getting together at night, and of course she's heartbroken because Kevin has just rejected her. And so I'm like, oh Lord, she's gonna wreak havoc on Dana. So episode 7 is titled Jane. It's titled Jane, but I'm thinking about it, I'm like, who even was Jane? Did Jane even show up? And so Dana is trying to save everybody on the plantation, but nobody has her back. Kevin is like, if we try to save everybody, we gonna lose our minds. Sarah is just trying to survive. Luke, of course, is upset about what just went down with Celeste and the baby. So he's like, it's not your fault, Dana, but he's not really fooling with Dana either right now. So it's like nobody has her back. And so Luke, because he's upset, he's playing a dangerous game because Tom takes him to go look at some land. And basically Tom's like, oh, I might make you the person over this land. And Luke is like, you gonna make me over some land that's worthless. You know it's worthless. And so Tom is like, basically starting to realize that Luke is still upset about Celeste and the baby and that he's starting to act out. And Dana, of course, because Tom has left with Kevin, Rufus, and Luke, she's been left at the house to tend to Margaret and her sister. And so Margaret, of course, because she's upset about Kevin rejecting her and for Dana, she's wreaking havoc on Dana. And so Dana walking around with an attitude because Margaret then threw this tea in her face. And Sarah is not being no help to her because Sarah is upset about what went down with Winnie and being starved. So Dana walking around with an attitude. I'm like, Dana, I know you upset, but you can't walk around with an attitude, girl, because you might get killed. And so I suspected that Kevin had substance abuse issues because he's been trying really hard to stay away from alcohol in the past, and Tom keeps trying to get him to drink. And so I'm like, it's seeming like he's had issues with this in the past, and that's why he's trying to stay away. And so, of course, Margaret's sister Maggie is trying to convince Margaret to leave Tom because she doesn't like Tom. And she questions Dana on like if it's true that Tom starved the slaves. And she basically goes into this spiel about how Margaret was never like this before she married Tom. She was a nice girl. And, you know, she didn't believe in mistreating slaves and stuff like that. Tom, of course, he gets Rufus drunk because Kevin has tried to encourage Tom to spend more father-son time with Rufus. And so Tom's definition of spending father-son time is taking him to the city to get drunk at a bar. Rufus, of course, gets sent home early because he's too drunk and he reveals that Kevin is sleeping with Dana. Luke is sold because he caught an attitude with Tom, so Luke gets sold, and Kevin does not like the entertainment, just some demeaning entertainment with slaves. And Kevin, of course, he doesn't enjoy this, and so they leave to go back to the plantation, and Tom confronts him on sleeping with Dana, and Kevin's like, you're no better than me. And so Tom, he gets offended by that, so he basically drops Kevin where he's at and tells Kevin, you're not welcome on my land no more. If you come back, I'm gonna kill you. And so Kevin makes his way to Olivia's, and when he gets there, Winnie is still there. And so Winnie, she decides to take her own course of action, and she runs away from Olivia's house when she gets her first opportunity, so Kevin chases her down. Margaret takes Rufus away because he comes home drunk, so she takes Rufus at the advice of her sister. Dana's trying to stop them, but they don't listen to her. And so they leave, and Dana's distraught about this. And so then Sarah comes and tells Dana that Kevin will not be returning and that Tom owns her now. And so the last episode is episode 8, and it's titled Alice. And we open with this flashback to 1989 when Olivia is pregnant. I started laughing because the lady playing the grandma is this actress that I seen in this other show called Saints and Sinners that aired on Bounce. And I was laughing because when I first seen her, I'm like, Lord, not her. Why is she always playing some crazy old lady? And of course, the grandma is a piece of work. Olivia, she's on her way to rescue Dana because Kevin reveals that he has been dropped from Tom's good graces and Dana's still on the plantation and he can't go back to get her. So Olivia goes to rescue her. And so when she gets there, she comes across Sarah to basically ask Sarah to send Carrie to get her out of there because she's learned that Luke has been sold. And so she has to basically do it herself. And Sarah and Olivia, they get into a confrontation because Sarah reveals that she doesn't like Dana because Dana changes too much. And she says the same about Olivia because when Olivia first showed up, she was doing too much. And Olivia's like, what are you talking about, Sarah? And Sarah basically reveals that she is the one who was killing Margaret's babies. And she tried to kill Rufus. And so Sarah is the one that Dana saw in the first episode flipping Rufus over on his face. And so Olivia's like, what is wrong with you? And Sarah's like, I'm just trying to make things a little bit better for us on the plantation. And here y'all come trying to save the baby. Why y'all gotta keep interfering? And so they get into it. And while they get into it, Tom comes into the cookhouse. He's looking for Dana because Dana's not where she's supposed to be. So he goes to find her. He finds her in a cabin with a book. And so basically, Dana has been teaching Nigel to read because that's what Luke asked her to do. And so Nigel, of course, is freaking out because his father hasn't come back from the city. Dana tells him that he has to be strong and that he basically has to do what his father wanted. And so Tom comes to the cabin looking for her. Nigel manages to escape before Tom gets out, but he spots Dana with a book, and so he takes Dana and he begins whipping her because Dana offered to teach Tom to read, and of course Tom does not like anyone who is smarter than him, especially a slave. So he starts whipping Dana, and Olivia comes to rescue Dana, and so they disappear to the present together. And Dana is freaking out because she's disappeared and she's left Kevin behind in the past. And the nosy neighbors was getting on my nerves because the wife is like, oh my gosh, I'm scared. I don't like violence. Her husband, the last time Kevin and Dana were in the past, her husband went over there to defend her honor because she went over there being nosy. And so her husband and Kevin got in a fight. And so she's like, oh my gosh, I don't like violence. I'm like, girl, you brought this on yourself because you keep being nosy. Granted, I understand that you suspect that Dana is in an abusive relationship, so you're trying to rescue her. But you brought this on yourself by being nosy. Talking about you don't like violence. Kevin's sister Penny comes over to the house. She's the one who called the police because she did the little Find My iPhone on Kevin's iPhone and it was at Dana's house. So she goes over there and she calls the police because she hasn't heard from Kevin. Dana basically tells her that Kevin left and he left his phone at her house and she doesn't know where he went. And the sister reveals that Kevin did indeed have substance abuse issues. And I was like, I was right. And of course, Kevin has been left in the past, and he learns this from Tom, who comes barging into the cabin looking for Dana. Aunt Denise comes over to talk to Dana, and so Dana reveals everything that's going on, and Aunt Denise finally believes her because she saw it with her own eyes. Denise is the one who tells Dana about the family Bible, and so Dana goes look in the family Bible and discovers that Alice is her ancestor and not Carrie. And I was like, Dana, you didn't even know about the family Bible? Are you serious? The season ends with Kevin. He's in the past, and he is basically taking care of Alice. He's riding with Alice, I'm assuming north. As he's riding north, he sees Sabina chained up like she's being sold elsewhere again. When I seen her, I'm like, so was Sabina supposed to get more relevance in season 2? Because I suspect Kevin was going to start being an abolitionist like he was in the book. And so I suspect that the first person he was going to free was Sabina. The show ends with Denise getting a call from Alan that Olivia has been found in New York by NYPD. And that's how it ends. And I was pissed because I was like, we ended right in the middle and then y'all canceled it. I feel like this series and the Beloved movie are examples of why you make your own opinions on stuff, because a lot of people said this adaptation was really bad and that it wasn't a good show, but I loved it. It was amazing. So as an adaptation, I gave it a 2.5 out of 5. They took a lot of creative liberties with the story. If you want a straight adaptation, like I don't want nothing changed, like minimal cuts adaptation, that's not for you. This is not for you. You probably still gonna be waiting a little bit on that one. I liked what they did with it. I loved it. It was a great adaptation and it was still like fresh and new and it brought new life to the story. As a show, I give it a 5. It is a 5 out of 5. I loved this. I am very pissed that we are not, as of right now, getting a second season. Why did we cancel this? Why did we cancel it? In the middle of the story, y'all could have at least finished it out before y'all canceled it. Everybody involved on this production did their thing. It was amazing. It was wonderful. What I'm hopeful for is that maybe another network will pick it up so we can at least finish out this storyline. And then maybe in the future we get like a more faithful adaptation so that way everybody gets what they want. We have a great adaptation that actually finishes storyline and then we get an adaptation that's a lot closer to the book. I hope someone picks it up so we can finish this out because it was getting good. The storyline was getting good and I really enjoyed the adaptation. Even though the score is a 2.5 because they did so much creative liberties with it, I really enjoyed what they did. So I was upset that it got canceled and I'm hoping it gets picked back up so we can finish it out.
I want what I deserve. I want my candy bar.
But overall, my adaptation score is a 2.5 out of 5. My show score is a 5 out of 5. I really enjoyed this show. I loved it. It was really good. I feel like it did the book justice. Thank you for tuning into this video. If you liked it, go ahead and give it a comment, a like, and a subscribe. And feel free to check out more content on my channel, and I'll see you next time.